Can you hear it? That gentle, distant sound beneath the quiet, not quite the wind, not quite the sea, a low hum, a whisper, as if something ancient is breathing just below the surface. Breathe in, slowly now, let the world begin to fall away. You are safe here, you are floating, and just for a little while, time has no meaning. Nothing exists but you and the sea. Tonight, I will take you somewhere far away, to a place that lives in the spaces between memory and myth, a place that once glowed with light, laughter, and impossible beauty, and now sleeps beneath the waves, waiting to be remembered. They called it Atlantis, but before the name, before the stories, there was only the sound of water, the warmth of the sun, and a world unlike any you've ever known. Far beyond the edge of maps and knowledge, past the pillars of Hercules and into the arms of the Atlantic, there once stood a vast and golden land, not built by gods, but shaped by those who knew them well. The Atlanteans were dreamers, yes, but they were also builders, healers, guardians of light. They spoke in colors and tones, wrote in symbols made of thought, and their cities were not just structures, but living symphonies of energy and stone. They understood balance, the sacred harmony between earth, sea, and sky, between spirit and matter, between giving and receiving. Their temples were silent but alive. Their gardens floated above water and danced in the breeze. They used crystal towers, not only for beauty, but to speak across great distances, to heal, to learn, to dream together. They lived with purpose, and they lived with peace. But peace, as the old stories tell, is fragile, and even in the most radiant of places, shadows wait patiently. No one knows exactly when it began. The shift, the imbalance, the slow unraveling. Maybe it started with pride, maybe with greed, or maybe it was simply the weight of time, reminding them that nothing perfect can last forever. The seas began to stir, the skies grew heavy, and deep beneath the soil, the crystal core began to tremble. The wisest among them saw it first, in dreams, in visions, in the silence between thoughts. They tried to warn the others, tried to slow the rise of the tide, but some things, once set in motion, cannot be undone. And so the golden halls were emptied, the towers dimmed, and one night, the sea came to claim what it once had given. Atlantis did not scream, it did not fight. It sank with the dignity of something eternal, carried gently into sleep by the waves that had once lapped against its shores like lullabies. And though the land is gone, the memory remains, in you, in the hush of the ocean, in the stillness of a dream. Tonight, let it return. Let the currents carry you back, back to the golden bridges, back to the floating gardens, back to the place where everything made sense, where everything was whole. Close your eyes, listen closely. The ocean is speaking, and if you are still enough, if your heart is quiet enough, you may hear it. The whisper beneath the waves. They say all stories begin somewhere. Some begin with a whisper, some with a dream, and some with a vision too strange to be ignored. Over 2,000 years ago, a man sat beneath the olive trees of Athens, a thinker, a philosopher, a keeper of questions too vast for answers. His name was Plato. He did not speak of Atlantis as myth, not as fantasy, but as memory passed down, like an ember glowing softly in the dark corners of human thought. He claimed the story came from Solon, a wise man who had traveled to Egypt generations earlier. Their priests spoke of a powerful land beyond the pillars of Hercules, a civilization older than Athens itself, radiant, unmatched, and lost to the sea in a single day and night. Plato told the story twice, once in Timaeus, and again in Critias, not to dazzle, not to entertain, but to warn. For Atlantis in his telling was both paradise and parable, a place of greatness that forgot its place in the order of things. He described a kingdom ruled by Poseidon's bloodline. 10 kings, 10 provinces, arranged in concentric circles of land and water. A temple at the center, shining with precious metals, and crowned by a statue of the sea god himself. Gold, orichalcum, silver, materials we dream of even now. But it was not wealth alone that made Atlantis special. It was balance between power and purpose, between might and morality. And when that balance broke, when pride outgrew wisdom, the gods, or perhaps the laws of nature themselves, sent the ocean to restore order. A flood, a quake, a silence, and just like that, the mighty city was gone. Many say Plato invented the tale, a political allegory, a cautionary fable. Others feel something stir in their bones when they hear the name Atlantis, as though he wasn't just telling a story. He was remembering something long buried. Why would a philosopher, a man of reason, speak so specifically, so vividly, unless he believed? Why name the rivers, the kings, the temples, unless they once stood proud beneath the sun? Plato was not a fool, and perhaps he knew more than he could ever safely say. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you see it? A wide plain stretching to the horizon, framed by mountains, kissed by snow, a capital gleaming in circles, moats filled with sea water, bridges stretching across shimmering stone, people moving in rhythm, a civilization in flow. Now imagine the tremble beneath their feet, the sudden silence of birds, the first crack splitting the temple floor, and then the roar, not of war, but of nature reclaiming what had been borrowed. Water rushing, stones falling, voices crying out to stars they could no longer see, and then only the sea. Perhaps Plato heard that sound in his dreams. Perhaps he saw it in his mind as clearly as if he had been there. Perhaps Atlantis chose him to speak once more through the pen of a man who listened. And tonight, as you lie still and breathe deeply, maybe you can listen too. Not just with your ears, but with the ancient part of you that still remembers things never taught. Let the image form slowly. Let it drift in like mist over calm water. Atlantis, not just a name, but a place your soul has visited in sleep. A city not lost, but waiting, beyond time, beyond thought, just beneath the surface. And as you sink deeper into stillness, let the vision become real. Because in dreams, all things forgotten may yet return. And sometimes, the truth whispers softest of all. There is a place, spoken of only in fragments, veiled behind poetry and myth, and wrapped in the soft folds of forgetting. It was said to lie beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond the reach of known maps, beyond the comfort of the familiar world, out there where the sea grew deep and blue, where stars danced differently, where the winds carried ancient names no longer spoken. The Greeks knew the pillars, 2 mighty sentinels rising from the sea, the gateway between the known and the unknown, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a narrow throat where the Atlantic sighs into the Mediterranean. Beyond that point lay mystery. To the ancient world it was not merely distance that kept them from what was beyond. It was reverence and fear, for sailors who ventured too far never returned. And those who did spoke of strange islands that moved, of lights beneath the water, and of voices on the wind. Plato said that Atlantis was a great island, larger than Libya and Asia combined. It sat at the heart of a network of lands, feeding and trading with distant peoples across the sea. A mother civilization, ancient before Egypt had its first kings, wise before the pyramids rose from sand. Its plains were broad and rich, fed by rivers that sang through valleys. Its mountains touched the clouds, hiding forests of trees unknown to our world today. And its shores glowed golden in the light of an eternal sun. But it was more than beauty that defined Atlantis. It was energy, The land itself pulsed with life, an unseen current flowing through stone and root and sea. Many believe it was the Earth's own heart made visible, a chakra of the planet, beating slowly beneath ocean and sky. And that's why the land was so fertile, so alive. They say crystals formed naturally in the soil, massive towers of quartz and strange metals, and the Atlanteans learned to listen to them, not just as tools, but as teachers. Imagine a people who spoke with the sea, who read the movement of tides like scripture, who knew that land and sky were not separate, but lovers in an eternal embrace. This is the land Plato hinted at, and many have tried to find. Some say it was swallowed by the Atlantic. Others believe it lies beneath the ice of Antarctica, hidden under sand in the Sahara, or buried beneath the waters of the Caribbean. But maybe Atlantis does not wish to be found in the way we expect. Maybe the map is not drawn in ink, but in memory. A memory that lives within the soul of those who still dream. Perhaps you have seen this land before, in a dream you couldn't quite remember. In the hush between waking and sleep, a golden light on the horizon, a mountain that shimmered, a temple with no door. True, maybe you walked those shores long ago. Maybe your hands once touched those stones, and the sound of waves tonight is not just ocean, but welcome, calling you back to a place you never truly left. So drift now, slowly, softly. Let the salt in the air find your skin. Let the breeze speak a language only your heart remembers. You are crossing the pillars now, leaving the world behind, entering a place untouched by time, unseen by eyes, but known to the soul. Atlantis waits, not ahead, but within. Before there were names, before kingdoms and calendars and kings, there was the sea, endless, ancient, quiet in its knowing. It watched the first mountains rise, listened as rivers carved paths across the land, and waited, patient as stars were born and forgotten again. The sea is not merely water. It is memory given form, a flowing, shifting archive of everything the world has ever been. Long before Atlantis fell, the sea already knew it would, because nothing escapes the memory of the sea. It remembers the footsteps on golden shores, the hum of crystal towers alive with light, the laughter of children running through orchards that floated above the earth. It remembers the sound of Atlantean voices, soft and melodic, speaking languages that danced more than they spoke. It remembers the stillness of that final sunrise, the long pause before the trembling began, the silence of a world about to disappear. They say the ocean is cruel, but the truth is, it is simply honest. It does not destroy out of anger. It reclaims what is forgotten by the surface. Atlantis did not fall in fire. It did not end in screams. It was taken gently, slowly, as if the sea were cradling it back to sleep. The land trembled, the waters rose, and the people watched as the horizon curved inward, as the sky grew darker, and the air itself turned heavy with knowing. There was no chaos, only stillness, a strange, sacred hush, as everything returned to where it began. The ocean holds what we no longer can. It is not a grave, but a keeper, a vessel of what once was, and perhaps still is. Sometimes, if you stand at the edge of the water long enough, if the night is quiet, and your mind has grown soft with sleep, you'll hear something in the waves. Not a voice, not a word, but a pull, like a song you don't remember learning, yet somehow know by heart. A shimmering memory slips through the tides, the curve of a ruined column, a staircase leading into darkness, a flash of something golden just beneath the surface. Not every eye can see it. Not every soul is ready. But those who dream deeply, those who listen closely, they feel it. Atlantis is not lost. It is submerged in time, resting beneath layers of thought and myth, tucked gently within the folds of the ocean's oldest dream. There are sailors who have felt it, artists who have painted it without knowing why, children who speak of cities beneath the waves before they've ever heard the name. Because memory does not live in books. It lives in the body, in the breath, in the quiet places of the heart where dreams and truth intertwine. So let yourself drift now, let your thoughts untangle, and your breath slow. You are safe, held by the same sea that holds the memory of everything that has ever been. Atlantis is not calling to be found, it is calling to be remembered. And as you slip deeper into rest, into stillness, into dream, perhaps you'll hear it too, a melody of what once was, what still waits, what whispers to you now. From far below, the sea remembers, and somewhere inside you, so do you. They say it rose like a jewel from the sea, not built, but revealed, as though the land itself had been sculpted by divine hands, and left for mankind to inherit. Atlantis was not merely a city. It was a symphony made solid, a vision shaped in stone, light, and purpose. The Golden City stood at the very heart of the great island, like a sun around which all else revolved. It was not a chaotic sprawl of buildings and streets, but a perfect design, concentric rings of land and water woven together in harmony, each ring a layer of purpose. At its center was the sacred island, a holy core where the temple of Poseidon stood, vast, radiant, alive with power. They say its walls shimmered with orichalcum, a metal now lost to time, red gold in hue, glowing softly as if lit from within. Marble columns soared like frozen waterfalls. Veins of crystal ran through the floors, catching light and sending it dancing across polished surfaces. Here the Atlanteans gathered not just to worship, but to listen, for the temple was not a place of ritual alone. It was a living instrument, designed to resonate with the vibrations of the earth itself. The air inside was heavy with energy, humming, pulsing, as if the building breathed along with those who entered. Surrounding the temple was the royal palace, a structure so vast it seemed less a building than a city. Within a city, its halls were lined with silks that moved even when there was no breeze. Gardens grew, not just from soil but from memory, responding to thought, blooming with intention. There were no torches, no crude fires, for the very walls emitted a gentle light, born from the interplay of crystals and magnetism. The second ring held the homes of the philosophers, scientists, healers, and artists, structures grown, not built, shaped by harmony rather than labor, domes of glass and copper, spires that pointed to constellations whose names we've long forgotten, pathways that glowed underfoot as people walked by. Further out were the districts of learning, vast libraries with scrolls encoded not in ink but in vibration, knowledge stored in stone, in light, in the flow of water across etched grooves. Young minds didn't memorize facts, they attuned to frequencies, sat in silence, and absorbed meaning the way roots absorb rain. The outermost rings held the artisans, the stewards of the land, the guardians of balance. They worked with hands guided by spirit, carving instruments that sang, weaving fabrics that calmed the heart, creating food not just to nourish the body, but to uplift the soul. Waterways circled through the city, like veins, not just for transport, but for resonance. The water was alive. It carried energy, sound, memory, connecting every ring, every heart, every thought. Bridges spanned the channels, shaped in arches that mimicked the sacred geometry found in nature. Spirals, triangles, golden ratios, not as decoration, but as language. The very structure of Atlantis spoke, and those who lived within it understood how to listen. Every element had its place, every sound had its echo, every being had its role, not assigned by force, but drawn forth by inner resonance. The city itself was a teacher, a healer, a mirror. There was no separation between the spiritual and the physical. Science and soul walked hand in hand, And art was not an escape from truth, but a direct path to it. In Atlantis, even the air carried intention, and yet, even in perfection, seeds of forgetting can take root. Perhaps it was in the shimmer of gold that the first shadow grew. Perhaps the brilliance of the crystal towers began to blind rather than illuminate. But on those early days, before the balance began to tilt, the city was pure, untouched, radiant. Close your eyes and imagine it. The soft hum of the temple under your feet, the glow of the waters as they spiral around you, the song of the city, a lullaby made from stone, sky, and silence. You walk its streets not as a stranger, but as one who remembers, and in the quiet spaces between your breaths, the city breathes with you. It is still there, beneath the waves, intact, asleep, dreaming of the day it might rise again, not to rule, not to conquer, but to remind us of what we once were and might become again. The Golden City is not lost. It simply waits, beneath memory, beneath myth, beneath the sound of your own heartbeat. And tonight, it remembers you too. Long before the stones of Atlantis were set, before the spiraling waterways flowed, before the towers rose to meet the sky, there were the suns, the 10 rulers born of sea and earth. They were not kings in the way we know kings, not tyrants cloaked in conquest, but guardians, placed to maintain harmony across the 10 realms of the great island. It is said that Poseidon himself, the god of the ocean depths, once walked the surface of the earth, drawn not by war but by wonder. He came upon a land untouched, rich and fertile, nestled near the warm breath of the sea, and there he found a woman unlike any other, Cleito, a mortal, yes, but her spirit held a clarity rarely seen in either gods or men. Poseidon saw in her not weakness, but reflection, and from their union were born 10 sons. He encircled her home with rings of land and water, shaping the sacred heart of Atlantis with his divine hand. The first city was built not from ambition, but from love, a gift for a woman who carried the seed of a civilization in her soul. Their children, the 5 pairs of twin sons, would inherit the island, dividing it not through greed, but through balance. 10 regions, 10 guardians, each responsible not just for rule, but for resonance. At the center was Atlas, the eldest, the one after whom the land would take its name. It was he who received the sacred capital, the Golden City, the temple, the throne that was not a throne, but a seat of service. Atlas was not chosen because he was strongest, but because he listened deepest. His brothers ruled the surrounding regions, and together they formed a council, not of dominance, but of unity. Each carried a different tone of Atlantis's great song, a different note in the scale of harmony. One governed the mountains, where sacred metals slumbered beneath the stone. Another watched the forests, listening to the wisdom of trees that had stood since before memory. One ruled the sky paths, guiding the flight of ships that sailed not on water, but on air. And another kept the archives, holding the dreams of the people in crystal vaults beneath the earth. They were not perfect, but they were pure, at least in the beginning, and their line would continue for generations, passing down wisdom, not by blood alone, but by frequency. Each successor attuned, trained and tested in the silent chambers, where the city itself whispered lessons through light and sound. The sons of Poseidon were not gods. They walked with the confidence of those who knew their place in the vast music of creation. They built with care, governed with grace, and lived not to dominate nature, but to move in rhythm with it. But time, even in Atlantis, flows like the tide, slow, patient, eroding even the strongest stone if left unguarded. As generations passed, some forgot the silence, some turned from inner knowing toward outer power. The council began to fracture, not in violence, but in subtle misalignments. Small desires grew into ambition. The dance of harmony slowed, the rhythm became uneven, and the land, sensitive as it was, began to respond. But in those early ages, while the sun still sang the song of balance, Atlantis thrived. Close your eyes. Picture them not as kings, but as keepers, standing barefoot on soil that glowed beneath their steps. Voices soft but certain, hands open, never clenched, eyes that reflected not the sky, but the sea. You may have known one, you may have been one, and even now, deep within you, that memory stirs. The suns are not lost. Their story, like the city they served, waits patiently beneath the noise of the world. And in your stillness tonight, perhaps you'll hear them again, calling not with words, but with presence, guardians of a dream that has not ended, only changed form. Atlantis was not a city of stone alone. It was a city of sound, of energy, of intention shaped into matter. Every wall, every arch, every spiral stair was not just built, but composed, crafted with a purpose that reached far beyond utility. The Atlanteans did not build to impress, they built to align. They understood something we have long forgotten, that form affects frequency, and frequency shapes consciousness. Their cities were not collections of buildings, they were instruments, resonant spaces tuned to the human soul. The heart of every structure was geometry, sacred, precise, alive. They didn't follow blueprints on parchment, but patterns in light, fractals found in nature, the spiral of the nautilus, the golden ratio of a leaf, the rhythm of waves against the shore. Buildings curved gently with the land, not in opposition, but in dialogue with it. Temples were built at intersections of ley lines, those unseen rivers of energy that crisscrossed the earth like veins. The materials chosen were not only durable, but vibrationally intelligent. Stones that sang when struck, crystals that shifted light in deliberate ways, metals that enhanced or muted sound depending on their placement. Inside the temple's sound chambers were tuned to specific frequencies, rooms where a single note would linger in the air like incense, guiding the mind into deeper states of awareness. Some chambers were for healing, others for learning, and some for remembering. The Atlanteans believed that memory was not stored only in the brain, but in the body, the breath, and even the space around us. By walking into a certain structure, one might feel a forgotten truth stir inside, not because it was taught, but because the space itself reminded you. Homes were circular or spiral, shaped to allow energy to flow without interruption. No sharp corners, no dead ends, only movement, continuity, breath. Each dwelling was unique to its inhabitant, designed in harmony with their personal frequency, and over time the home would adapt, subtly shifting as its occupant grew. There were no street lamps, but the roads glowed, not with electricity, but with embedded crystal lines that reacted to motion and thought. There were no elevators, yet levels were accessed through magnetic lifts powered by intention and harmonic vibration. Even public spaces held layers of purpose, gathering halls with acoustics so perfect that one could whisper in a corner and be heard at the center, fountains that pulsed in rhythm with the lunar tides, gardens planted in spirals, designed to awaken different states of mind as you walked through them. The Atlanteans believed architecture could heal, that a city could raise consciousness just by existing, and so they built, not only for beauty, but for the soul. Their towers reached upward, not to dominate the sky, but to conduct it, drawing down stellar energies, aligning with constellations during certain times of year to amplify thought. emotion, even collective dreaming. They did not separate science from spirit, physics from philosophy, material from magical. For them, it was all one. Even the act of building was sacred. Before laying the first stone, the builders would enter a state of silence, listening for the voice of the land, waiting for permission, for guidance, and only when the earth responded, through sensation, vibration, or dream, would they begin. This is why Atlantis did not feel like a city, but a being. It breathed, it pulsed, it remembered. To walk its streets was to step into a state of alignment, to be gently corrected by the space around you, reminded through architecture of who and what you truly were. We have echoes of this now, ruins whose proportions still move us, ancient temples where the air still hums. But in Atlantis, it was not an echo. It was the original song, and somewhere, deep beneath the waves, in caverns untouched by time, those structures remain, waiting, perfectly preserved, perfectly tuned, still humming in the dark, still listening. And perhaps tonight, as you drift between waking and sleep, you'll find yourself standing before one, a doorway made of stone and silence, a corridor where light bends and breath stills. You step forward, and the city recognizes you. Welcome home.
There is a glow that does not come from flame, a warmth that does not come from heat, a light that does not cast shadow. In Atlantis, such light was not rare. It was everywhere, embedded in the walls, woven into garments, pulsing beneath the ground, like the heartbeat of the land itself. The Atlanteans did not discover energy, they remembered it. They understood that power was not something to be extracted, but something to be harmonized with. Not domination of nature, but cooperation with its deeper rhythms. At the center of their energy system were the crystals, vast, living structures beneath the city, not mined, but grown over generations, guided by thought, sound, and intention. These were not simple stones, they were conscious conduits, bridges between the physical and the energetic realms. Some crystals glowed with golden light, others with deep violet or soft blue, each tuned to specific frequencies, emotions, functions. There were healing crystals, memory crystals, navigational crystals that responded to planetary alignments, even guardian crystals that protected certain areas by shifting vibrational access. At the very heart of the city, deep below the Temple of Poseidon, was the Great Crystal, a structure larger than any cathedral, suspended in a chamber where no one spoke. Because the sound of silence there was already enough. The Great Crystal did not generate energy as we understand it. It resonated with the consciousness of those around it, amplifying thoughts, emotions, even intentions. It allowed entire communities to link minds, to meditate together, to dream in unison. Energy flowed outward from this crystal, like breath from a sleeping giant, traveling through underground conduits, lined with orichalcum and magnetite, rising up into homes, towers, temples, not in cables or wires, but in carefully crafted geometric matrices that moved energy like water. It was not only light and movement they powered, but memory, frequency, emotion itself. A room could be tuned to calm the nervous system, or open the heart, or induce lucid dreams with gentle pulses of harmonic resonance. Even the air in Atlantis was charged, not in the way of static, but in the way of presence. You could feel it in your skin, in your breath, like walking through the edge of a song. There were sound chambers used for healing, crystalline pools that rebalanced the body through vibration, devices that, with a simple tone, could realign organs, clear trauma, or shift consciousness into higher states.
But this power came with responsibility. The Atlanteans knew that energy responds to intent, that the crystals could amplify not only wisdom but ego, not only love but fear. That is why only those who had passed through the inner initiations could access certain layers of the energy system, not because of hierarchy, but because resonance was the gatekeeper. As time passed, as the outer brilliance of Atlantis began to outshine its inner wisdom, the balance faltered. Crystals began to hum out of tune, not because they failed, but because the people had forgotten how to listen, and the great crystal, which had once sung in harmony with the hearts of the people, began to tremble. Some say it was the misuse of these energies that led to the end, not a single act, but a slow drift from inner clarity, like a song played too loudly, too long, until even beauty becomes unbearable. But others say the crystals are still there, humming quietly beneath the waves, perfectly intact, waiting for hearts once again still enough, minds once again clear enough, to remember the song. Close your eyes, feel it now, a soft vibration beneath your spine, a gentle hum in your chest, not imagined but real, ancient, familiar. Perhaps you've held such a crystal in your hand, without knowing why it made you weep. Perhaps you've dreamt of light that came from nowhere, structures made of sound, rooms that healed with color and breath. You are not imagining it, you are remembering it. Atlantis did not lose its power, we simply lost our harmony with it. And tonight, if your breath is slow, if your thoughts grow quiet, perhaps the crystal within you, the one that has always been there, will begin to glow again, and the city, beneath the sea, will feel it and hum in response. Before the first symbols were carved into stone, before alphabets took form, before sound became syllable, there was a language that did not need to be spoken, a language of essence, of light. The Atlanteans did not write, as we do now. They encoded, not onto paper or clay, but into vibration, into geometry, into the very fabric of light itself. Their words were not made of letters, but of form, of frequency, of color, and sound woven into one. It was said that to speak in the language of light was not to communicate about something, but to become it. A healer did not describe healing. They became the frequency of healing and shared it through resonance. A teacher did not lecture. They stood within the vibration of wisdom, and those nearby received it as a transmission. Imagine a world where truth was not argued, but felt, not debated, but remembered, where lies had no ground to stand on, because falseness could not hold a frequency. It simply dissolved. Their symbols were not static. Each one was alive, shifting subtly depending on who viewed it, what moment it was seen in, and what was needed at that exact time. A single glyph could contain 1,000 meanings, but only the one you were ready to receive would be revealed. Temples were covered in these glowing scripts, etched into walls, floors, even air itself. Certain chambers where the language floated freely, like living thought made visible. They were not decorations, but activations. To walk through the city was to be in conversation, not just with others, but with the space itself. Light pulsed from doorways in patterns meant to calm. Streets carried a subtle rhythm, guiding emotion. Bridges sang soft notes as one crossed, realigning thought. The Atlanteans believed that every being was born with a unique tone, a personal frequency, a kind of soul signature, and this tone determined how they experienced and expressed the language of light. One person might resonate more with geometric form, another with harmonic sound, another with shifting color. Children learned this language not through study, but through remembering. They played with shapes that danced in midair, painted with colors that responded to mood, sang notes that formed visible spirals. And in doing so they weren't learning something new, They were uncovering something ancient within themselves. This language was used to guide, to heal, to build, to dream. Architects would sing designs into existence. Healers would paint light over the body to realign it. Scholars would step into encoded light fields and emerge with knowledge that had no need for translation. But the language of light required clarity, purity of intent, and as that purity began to waver, in the later days of Atlantis, the language itself began to fade. People could no longer hold the higher frequencies. Symbols became rigid, meanings became fixed, and what had once been fluid became fractured. Eventually the language was forgotten, buried beneath simpler tongues, split into fragments, now scattered across the world. A glyph in Egypt, a rune in Scandinavia, a mandala in Tibet, all whispers of the same ancient voice. But it is not gone. Many who dream deeply still see it. Symbols in sleep, colors that make no logical sense, yet feel familiar. A song with no words that brings tears to your eyes. That moment when you feel something true, but can't explain why. That is the language of light, calling back. Close your eyes now, not to silence the world, but to hear what lies beneath it. Feel into that space behind thought, where light moves like breath, and memory has no shape. You don't need to understand it, you only need to receive it. Atlantis still speaks, not in noise, but in radiance, not in sentences, but in symmetry. And tonight, as your inner voice grows quiet, the old language begins to rise, not from outside you, but from within. Because the language of light was never foreign, it has always been your first tongue. Atlantis did not thrive by accident. Its harmony was not the product of chance. Beneath its beauty, its brilliance, its radiant glow, there was order, a living structure of values, principles, and laws, not imposed but embodied. The laws of Atlantis were not written in stone tablets or carved into palace walls. They were etched into the hearts of the people, not enforced by punishment, but upheld through resonance, because in that ancient world, one could not live out of alignment without feeling it immediately. The Atlanteans lived in accordance with what they called the laws of balance. Balance between the self and the collective, between thought and feeling, between action and stillness. They knew that every movement echoed outward, that every word held weight, that to disturb the harmony within was to ripple disharmony throughout the whole. The first law was presence, to be fully where you are, in body, mind, and energy. A distracted soul could not contribute to the collective harmony, and so attentiveness was sacred. The second was responsibility, not as burden, but as awareness, the knowing that your energy is your creation, and what you send into the world will return, not as punishment, but as reflection. The third was alignment. Every individual had a frequency, a purpose, a role to play that was not assigned from above, but drawn from within. To force yourself into someone else's path was to distort both your own rhythm and theirs. Then came the law of transparency. In Atlantis, truth was not hidden, because vibration does not lie. Emotions were felt clearly, thoughts resonated openly, and deceit was not feared. It simply could not survive. There was also the law of stewardship. All things, land, water, knowledge, power, were seen as living gifts. To hoard was to separate, to share was to circulate, and circulation kept the energy pure. Perhaps the most sacred was the law of return, that all actions, all choices, all intentions would find their way back to their source, not as judgment, but as experience. To harm another was to fragment the self, to uplift another was to expand one's own field. Justice in Atlantis was not blind, it was vibrational. When dissonance occurred, it was treated not with punishment, but with healing. Individuals were brought back into harmony through sound therapy, meditation chambers, energetic rebalancing. There were no prisons, because there was no need. A person out of alignment could not endure the resonance of the city itself. They would feel it like noise in the bones, a disharmony that pushed them either toward healing or away. And so, governance was not about control, it was about attunement. Leaders were chosen not by vote, but by vibration, by the clarity of their field, the strength of their inner alignment, their capacity to hold collective energy without distortion. The council did not rule, it listened. Each member sat within an acoustically tuned chamber, where even the slightest shift in frequency could be felt. Decisions were made only when the tones of all present harmonized, when agreement was not verbal, but energetic. The city itself responded to this harmony. Lights would shift, water would pulse, the air would soften. Atlantis was alive, and it rejoiced when truth was spoken. But even in a society so refined, so aware, imbalance crept in slowly. As outer achievements began to outshine inner connection, the laws began to be treated as systems rather than sacred understandings. People followed rules, but forgot rhythm, and Atlantis, once perfectly in tune, began to hum off-key. Still, the laws remain, not just in history, but in the deep memory of the soul. You may feel them even now, a tug inside, when something doesn't feel right, a soft expansion when you act from truth, a strange peace when you step into alignment with who you really are. These are not coincidences, they are echoes. The laws of Atlantis were not lost, only silenced. And as you lie here, eyes closed, breath slow, thoughts quiet, maybe you'll hear them again, not as commands, but as chords, not as doctrine, but as music, because Atlantis was not governed by power, it was governed by harmony, and in stillness, harmony always returns. Long before the city rose in golden spirals, before crystals pulsed beneath the surface, before temples sang and towers breathed, there was a beginning, not of stone, but of spirit, not of power, but of presence. The first breath of Atlantis was not taken by the land, but by the one who would hold it in balance. Atlas, the first king, son of Poseidon, born of sea and earth, not a warrior, not a conqueror, but a harmonizer. His name would become legend, a symbol of strength, not measured by force, but by stillness. They say his eyes held the depth of oceans and the clarity of stars, that his voice could silence storms, not through command, but through calm. He was not crowned, there was no ceremony, no display of dominion. The land simply recognized him, and he, in return, recognized it. The island spoke to him in dreams. It pulsed with knowing beneath his feet. He walked its edges, listening before building, attuning to the soul of the place, before ever lifting stone. Atlas was not alone. He was the eldest of 10 brothers, born in pairs, each destined to govern one region of the island. But while the others ruled their realms with wisdom, it was Atlas who held the center, not as ruler of rulers, but as anchor. His presence stabilized the whole. He was the heart of the living system that was Atlantis, and everything else, the temples, the knowledge, the balance, grew outward from that still, central point. He lived simply, not in opulence but in resonance. His chamber overlooked the central pool of living water, a mirror-like lake that reflected not just form but truth. He would sit there for hours, not speaking, not planning, simply being, letting the waters speak back in ripples, flashes of color, and soft pulses of insight. Those who entered his space found themselves quieter, not by command, but by invitation. Their thoughts slowed, their breath deepened, their hearts softened, because Atlas did not lead with ideas. He led with vibration. He carried within him a perfect chord, a rare resonance that brought coherence to those around him. People would align in his presence without effort, like strings tuning themselves to a deeper harmony under his guidance. The early days of Atlantis were not just golden, they were whole. Trade flourished without greed. Innovation thrived without exploitation. Exploration unfolded without conquest. Every advancement was measured not by profit, but by harmony, by whether it deepened the song of the city or disrupted it. And Atlas listened, always, not to advisors, but to the land, to the crystals, to the wind across the plains. He spoke with birds, with stars, with silence. But even harmony cannot remain untouched forever. As centuries passed, and new generations inherited the thrones, the memory of Atlas began to shift. He became more symbol than presence, more myth than model. His teachings were studied, but not embodied. His name revered, but not remembered in vibration. Statues rose in his image. Temples were built in his honor. But the stillness that once radiated from his being became harder to find in the world he left behind. And yet, he is not gone. For those who close their eyes and sink beneath the noise, who sit quietly beside their own inner waters, the frequency remains, a calmness, a knowing, a clarity that needs no explanation. You may have felt it in moments of deep peace, when the world fell away, and something ancient stirred inside you. You may carry it in your spine, in your breath, in the space between thoughts. Atlas was not just the first king, he was the first chord, and Atlantis began, not when the city was built, but when a single being aligned so fully with the soul of the land that the land itself began to sing. Atlantis was not a place of random shapes or thoughtless designs. Every line drawn, every stone placed, every structure raised was guided by the silent wisdom of form. Sacred geometry was not theory, it was language, foundation, truth. They understood what we are only beginning to remember, that the universe does not speak in words. It speaks in patterns, spirals, circles, ratios, repeating endlessly in the stars, in seashells, in the branching of trees and the spiral of galaxies. In Atlantis, these patterns were everywhere, woven into the city like breath into a living body, not just beautiful but functional, not symbolic but alive. The flower of life, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the Merkaba. These were not esoteric diagrams tucked away in hidden scrolls. They were the actual blueprints of daily life. Homes were built on harmonic grids, aligned with the cycles of moon and sun, their foundations tuned to the frequencies of the land they sat upon. Walls curved with intention, domes rose in perfect arcs to collect energy and amplify resonance. The great temples were geometries made solid, each corridor, each archway, a note in a larger chord. Stepping through their halls was like walking inside a sacred equation. You felt it without needing to understand it. A shift in the body, the breath, the state of being. Atlantean healers used geometry in their work, not just as symbols but as tools. Certain shapes were placed on or around the body, spinning, floating, glowing, recalibrating energy fields, clearing distortions, reminding the cells of their original blueprint. Teachers used them in learning halls. Children would sit within a spiral configuration of crystals, allowing the arrangement to shape not only their thoughts, but the pathways through which those thoughts moved. Everything in Atlantis was designed to keep energy moving in a way that supported life. No stagnation, no sharp interruption, only flow, only rhythm, just as the universe intends. They believed that when we live inside harmonious form, we begin to remember who we are, because sacred geometry is not something outside of us. It is what we are made of. Look at your own body, the symmetry of your face, the spirals of your DNA, the patterns in your fingerprints. You are not apart from this language, you are its expression. And when you enter into a space built from that same language, something inside relaxes, aligns, opens. This is why Atlantis felt so peaceful, so whole. The city itself was an extension of cosmic design, not resisting the universe but participating in its music. But as disconnection grew, as ego began to lead instead of essence, the forms changed, subtle distortions appeared in the geometry, shapes built for status rather than balance, structures raised too quickly, too forcefully, and the song of the city began to waver, because sacred geometry only holds when the intention behind it is pure. When the shape no longer serves the soul, the form begins to fracture. Still, beneath the waves, the old structures remain, and those who have glimpsed them through deep-sea dives, remote viewing, dreams, they all say the same thing. The patterns are still there, the angles still perfect, the geometry still humming, waiting, and sometimes, in your dreams, you may find yourself standing within a perfect circle of light. You don't know how you got there, you don't know what it means, but you feel something align inside you, like an old key turning in a silent lock. That is sacred geometry remembering itself through you, because Atlantis may have fallen in form, but its pattern remains, unbroken, untouched, timeless. Beneath the golden city, deeper than the towers reached, and farther than most ever wandered, lay the true heart of Atlantis, the temples of the deep. These were not places built for ceremony, they were not for show, not constructed to impress gods or gather crowds. They were living sanctuaries, vibrational chambers crafted in the quiet, out of sight, known only to those whose purpose was inner alignment. They were hidden, not because they were forbidden, but because they could not be entered casually. The deeper one traveled into the earth, the more silent the world became, the more sensitive the air, the more transparent the self had to become. You did not walk into these temples with noise in your heart. You did not enter them while distracted, angry, disconnected. The doors themselves would not open for such energy, for these temples were conscious, attuned to vibration more than voice. The air within them shimmered, not with heat or light, but with memory, soundless and bright, like dreams made visible. They were carved into the living rock, deep within the body of the island, yet they felt weightless, as if time itself grew thinner there. Light did not come from torches or lamps. It radiated gently from the walls, from the floors, from floating crystalline veins that hummed in ancient tones. Some chambers were filled with water so pure, it held your reflection, not as it was but as it once was, or could be. In these pools, initiates would bathe not to cleanse the body, but the soul, sinking slowly into silence, until the boundary between skin and water dissolved. Other rooms were complete stillness, so quiet that you could hear your thoughts the moment they formed, and know which ones did not belong to you. These were places for remembrance, for healing, for truth, without words. Every detail within the deep temples followed sacred design, curves that calmed the nervous system, harmonics that lifted sorrow, crystals placed not randomly, but precisely where the flow of energy turned. Each step inward was a journey deeper into the self. Guides were few, often none at all, for the temples themselves guided you. If you were not ready, you would find only smooth walls and silence. But if you entered in truth, in stillness, the temple would awaken. Symbols would begin to glow along the walls, not with light, but with knowing. The air would shift, the gravity would change, time would stretch and fold, and something deep within would stir, a forgotten name, a sacred wound, a long-lost memory of your own beginning. Some initiates wept the moment they crossed the threshold, not from fear, but from recognition, from a sense of coming home to a place they never realized they missed. It was said that those who walked the full path of the deep temples emerged changed forever, not visibly, but vibrationally. They carried a new calm, a softened gaze, a silence that spoke more than any voice could. In Atlantis, such beings became teachers, healers, dreamers of structure. They needed no title, no temple of their own, for they were the temple now, walking reminders of the truth, buried beneath surface life. And when Atlantis fell, when the towers crumbled and the sea claimed its glory, many believed the deep temples were lost forever. But others say they still stand, untouched beneath the ocean floor, protected not by stone, but by vibration, still humming, still waiting, still watching. And sometimes in your dreams you find yourself descending down spiral stairs of light, into a space that feels vast and familiar. You do not rush, you do not speak, you simply enter, and the temple opens, not around you but within you, because the deepest temple was never made of walls. It was always waiting, in the quiet beneath your thoughts, in the space between your breaths, in the deep, where silence becomes song. To understand Atlantis fully, one must look not only beneath the sea, but above the sky. For the people of Atlantis were not just students of the earth, they were children of the stars. They knew that life did not begin on this planet alone, that the cosmos was alive, intelligent and interconnected, and that the heavens were not distant, but deeply familiar. They watched the sky not to predict weather or harvests alone, but to listen, to align, to remember. The stars were teachers, each constellation, a chapter in a vast cosmic memory, a story written in light and motion, and Atlantis was built to mirror this celestial wisdom. The layout of the city itself reflected the stars. The 10 provinces corresponded with stellar systems, their paths, their seasons, their energetic qualities. Temples were aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary conjunctions, but not only for ceremony. These alignments activated structures, awakened crystals, opened portals of consciousness. Atlantean astronomers were not mathematicians in towers with telescopes. They were initiates who could feel the movements of stars in their bodies. They tuned their own breath to the rhythm of the cosmos, and in doing so they became bridges between worlds. They believed that Earth was not isolated, but part of a great galactic family, that long ago star nations came together to seed consciousness here, each bringing a different frequency, a different code. Lyrans, Syrians, Pleiadians, Arcturians. These were not myths to them. They were ancestors, memory holders, guides. Some say Atlantis itself was a collaboration between star lineages, that its crystals held codes from distant systems, that its energy grids were tuned to frequencies far beyond Earth's current spectrum. The people of Atlantis remembered where they came from, and when they looked to the stars, it wasn't with longing, it was with recognition. They used starlight in their healing temples, drawing down specific rays during planetary alignments to amplify certain frequencies. They built observatories not just to track movement, but to enter communion, structures with open domes and sound-enhancing walls, where the starlight would fall in exact patterns on the floor, forming living mandalas of energy, and they would sit in silence, allowing that light to enter their skin, their cells, their memory. Many claimed they received visions in these moments, entire lifetimes remembered, languages returned, old knowledge flowing back like a river. But this connection to the stars was not escape. Atlantis was not about leaving Earth. It was about anchoring heaven into matter, bringing higher consciousness down, so that it could live in form. The Atlanteans believed that every soul was a starseed, a traveler wrapped in flesh, here for a time, and that each of us carries within a map, celestial and sacred, pointing us back to our origin. And when the people began to forget, when ego clouded the clarity, They stopped looking up with reverence and began looking out with control. The balance shifted, and the resonance between earth and sky weakened. But even now, the stars remember, and when you gaze into the night sky and feel that strange ache, that quiet pull in your chest, that sense that you belong to something far older than your name, that is not imagination, that is memory. Atlantis knew the stars not as strangers, but as family, and you, in your dreams, may have stood among them once, not as an observer, but as one of them, shining, remembering, returning. So tonight, as you drift, as your thoughts grow soft and the night deepens, let the stars speak again. Let them remind you of what the Atlanteans never truly lost, that we are not from Earth, we are of the universe. And Atlantis was the place where that truth was lived in every breath. When we think of ancient civilizations, we often imagine simplicity, tools of stone and bronze, wheels turning slowly under the weight of time. But Atlantis shatters that image, like a glass struck by pure tone. The Atlanteans possessed technology, not the kind forged in smoke and fire, but in silence and resonance. Their machines did not roar, they hummed. Their power did not pollute, it harmonized. They moved not through combustion, but through coherence. To them, technology was not separate from spirit. It was an extension of consciousness. A tool was only as effective as the intention behind it. And so every invention began not with design, but with alignment. They understood that energy follows awareness, and that the body, the mind, the tool, and the environment were all expressions of the same field. Nothing was outside the system. Everything was in relationship. The centerpiece of Atlantean technology was vibration, sound, light, magnetism, crystalline resonance. These were their elements, their code. They had devices that could levitate stone using tuned sound waves, not through brute force, but by matching the frequency of the object and gently lifting it out of resistance. They powered entire cities using radiant energy, drawn from the Earth's grid, from solar alignments, from deep crystalline networks, humming beneath the crust. Their homes were warmed, not with fire, but with tuned magnetics. Their lights glowed without wires or heat. The air itself felt charged with subtle electricity, clean and alive. Transportation was a dance between thought and field. Some vehicles moved along electromagnetic rails, others hovered through repulsion fields generated by crystalline cores. Some could travel through water as easily as air, shifting polarity to move with seamless grace. There were craft that responded to the pilot's intent rather than buttons, moving as an extension of thought, like a limb grown from imagination. In medicine, they had tools that could scan the energy body, not to diagnose in the traditional sense, but to reveal dissonance, instruments that pulsed coherent frequencies into the body to restore harmony, beds that used color, sound, and subtle magnetic waves to realign organs and memories alike. Disease to them was not an enemy, it was a message, and their technology did not suppress symptoms, it translated the message and brought the body back into tune. Their food was infused with light, water structured to carry information, clothing woven with fine threads of energy-reactive fibers that adjusted to the body's needs. They had memory spheres, crystal orbs that stored knowledge, not in data, but in frequency. A person could hold one and feel a lesson unfold within them, a memory, an understanding, a vision received like a gift. Their schools were not factories of information, but temples of discovery. Technology was not cold, it was alive, and treated with reverence, because they knew that every tool, no matter how advanced, was an amplifier of the self. And when the self was clear, the technology served life. But when the self became clouded, distracted, greedy, the same tools became dangerous. That was the turning point. Not a single invention, but a shift in vibration, when certain minds began using the tools for control, for separation, for ego's expansion rather than unity's unfolding. And so what once healed began to fracture, what once lifted began to consume. The harmony between heart and hand was broken, and the technology turned silent. Or perhaps it simply withdrew. Some say that when Atlantis fell, the great machines were not destroyed. They were deactivated, set into slumber by those who still remembered their purpose. And now they sleep beneath the waves, intact, waiting not for rediscovery, but for resonance. Because Atlantean technology cannot be reawakened through intellect alone, it requires coherence, alignment, humility, and so it remains still, waiting for the return of a people who remember that the greatest power is not what we can create, but how purely we can hold the light from which all creation flows. Tonight, as you drift into dream, perhaps you'll find yourself inside one of those ancient chambers, standing before a silent console of crystal and light. You reach out, not with your hand, but with your intention, and the whole room responds, not with sound, but with recognition, because it knows you, and it's been waiting. In Atlantis, silence was not emptiness, it was communication, a deeper kind, one that passed through words, around them, beneath them. For the Atlanteans, language was optional, but connection was constant. They spoke, yes, but only when needed, because most thoughts, most emotions, most intentions could be felt, shared instantly, clearly, without distortion. Telepathy wasn't a gift. It was a birthright. From the moment a child was born, they were immersed in a field of shared awareness, their family attuned, not just to their cries, but to their inner pulses. Before language, there was resonance, emotion translated, not into words, but into experience. This wasn't intrusion, it was harmony. No one could force their way into another's thoughts. For telepathy in Atlantis wasn't about reading, it was about matching. Only when two frequencies aligned could the channel open. This created a culture of radical honesty, where deceit could not hide behind smiles, where manipulation had no soil to grow, because the truth was felt. To lie in Atlantis was to experience internal dissonance, like trying to hold two notes that clash. The body, the energy field, even the environment would respond, and so truth wasn't enforced. It was inevitable. Telepathy also made teaching effortless. Information was not transmitted line by line, but downloaded as whole understandings. Teachers would sit in stillness and invite the student into the frequency of the lesson, and the knowledge would bloom within them, like a memory resurfacing. But beyond even telepathy, the Atlanteans practiced something more subtle, something they called spirit science. This was not science, in our modern sense, reductionist, mechanical, fragmented. It was a unified field of knowing, where spirit and matter were never separate, where the soul was not excluded from the equation, but central to it. They studied light, sound, vibration, not in laboratories, but within themselves. They observed the outer world as a mirror of the inner one. They understood that every organ, every thought, every pattern in nature held meaning. Spirit science taught that the universe was a living organism, and that every being was a cell within it. The health of the whole depended on the harmony of each part. This knowing shaped everything, from healing to agriculture, to architecture. Even time was seen differently, not as a straight line, but a spiral, moving through cycles, each return bringing deeper understanding. When a person became ill, they didn't ask, "What's wrong with my body?" They asked, "Where have I forgotten who I am?" When crops struggled, the farmers didn't blame the weather. They sang to the soil, listened for imbalance, and adjusted their presence accordingly. Spirit science taught that every problem had an energetic origin, and every solution a harmonic key, and through it all, telepathy remained the thread, allowing communities to move as one breath, to shift direction with no discussion, to enter silence together, and emerge changed. But even this great harmony dimmed with time, as the ego grew, as outer brilliance outpaced inner stillness, the frequencies became cluttered. People stopped listening with their hearts. They began broadcasting without receiving. The once clear field of shared thought became noisy, scattered. Misunderstanding returned. Assumption crept in. Separation, once unthinkable, became normal, and the spirit behind the science receded. But its memory lingers. In the moments when you feel someone thinking of you, when words are not spoken, but something passes between you and another, soft, clear, true. When you walk into a space and know what has been felt there, that is the echo, the quiet return of a truth. We once lived so fully, we forgot it was even unusual. Close your eyes now and notice, not your thoughts, but the space between them. Notice how the air around you isn't empty, how your energy reaches outward, and something, somewhere, answers. Atlantis still lives in the field between us, where silence speaks, where truth vibrates, where thought becomes light, and the soul remembers not just how to listen, but how to be heard without ever speaking a word. Hidden within the heart of Atlantis, beneath layers of temple, stone, and stillness, was a place unlike any other, the great library. But do not imagine shelves or scrolls or dusty aisles. The Atlanteans did not store knowledge in ink and paper. They preserved it in light, in sound, in frequency. The great library was not a building. It was a living consciousness, a vast crystalline chamber, circular in shape, echoing like a soft breath held inside the planet's chest. It pulsed gently, like a sleeping star. The walls were embedded with thousands of crystal nodes, each one attuned to a specific frequency, each one holding an aspect of understanding, not just facts or data, but entire fields of awareness. You did not read in this library, you entered resonance. You would sit in the center, breathe and quiet your mind. The crystal that matched your frequency would begin to glow, and slowly, a transmission would unfold. It might begin as a sound, a tone so pure it opened something behind your eyes, or a flash of light forming into symbols that danced through your mind like memories you forgot you had. And then came the knowing, not piece by piece, but all at once, an entire idea, a system, a vision of reality entering your field, like a gentle wave washing over your skin. Some emerged weeping, others laughing, some silent for days, not because they had read something, but because they had remembered something ancient and vast and real. Each crystal in the library held a different frequency: mathematics, healing, music, agriculture, soul evolution, planetary history, star maps, interdimensional travel. There were even crystals that held stories, not fictional tales, but living memories of civilizations now gone, encoded in color and rhythm and emotion. The librarians were not keepers, but guardians of flow. They did not instruct, they guided. They could sense the readiness of the seeker and direct them to the correct resonance, not through words, but through subtle gesture, through shared breath. Some areas of the library could only be accessed after inner work, not because they were restricted, but because their frequencies required coherence to be received. It was said that those who tried to enter certain chambers without inner alignment would simply fall asleep, or forget why they had come, gently guided back to readiness by the field itself. The great library was a teacher, a healer, and a mirror. Its purpose was not just to inform, but to evolve. to help each being become more fully themselves by reminding them of the vastness they already carried inside. And when Atlantis began to fall, when dissonance grew too loud, and the outer brilliance cracked, the library did not panic. It simply closed its eyes, like a wise elder folding into meditation. It sealed itself in silence, awaiting the return of a people once again clear enough to listen. Some say the library still hums beneath the ocean floor, intact, untouched, preserved in a stasis of frequency. Others believe pieces of it have awakened in scattered places, where intuition blooms, where innovation rises from dreams, where a simple moment of stillness opens the door to something inexplicably true. And perhaps you've already touched it, in a dream, in a flash of understanding that came from nowhere, in the feeling that knowledge doesn't need to be learned, only unlocked. That is the echo of the great library calling home. Tonight, as your thoughts soften and your breath deepens, listen closely. You may feel it beneath you, a quiet pulse in the earth, a rhythm not quite your own, or perhaps the rhythm of who you truly are. The great library is not lost. It is simply waiting for you to remember how to read without reading, to know without knowing why, to awaken what has always been yours. A light, glowing quietly, inside the silence, within the crystal, and deep within you. Far beyond the golden halls and crystalline chambers, past the temples of sound and the libraries of light, there was a place few spoke of, yet all knew deeply. The Garden of Balance. It was not the largest space in Atlantis, nor the most adorned. There were no grand statues or towers there, no gateways or guardians, because it needed none. The garden was its own protection, its own sanctuary. It sat at the meeting point of the city's energy lines, like a heart nested within a vast circulatory system. Soft, still, and vital, the Atlanteans called it Irulan, the place between breaths. Everything in the garden was designed to reflect harmony, but nothing was arranged by force. Trees did not grow in rows, yet their branches wove together in sacred geometries. Streams flowed not in straight lines, but in spirals and gentle arcs, singing as they moved over smooth stones that glowed with subtle hues. No one owned the garden, and no one ruled it. It was tended by those whose inner balance was steady enough not to disturb its field. Entering it was a choice, not a right, and the garden itself would know whether your energy belonged. If your thoughts were too loud, if your emotions swirled too chaotically, the path would seem to vanish, and you'd find yourself gently redirected elsewhere, not rejected, but invited to return when ready. But if your heart was still, even just for a moment, the path would open, and what awaited was not merely peace, but reflection. Because the Garden of Balance did not calm you, it revealed you. Some would enter and feel a lightness, like their burdens melting into the soil. Others would feel waves of grief, as old pain surfaced into the open air. Others still would sit and simply remember, not memories of childhood or name, but something deeper, the moment before incarnation, the pause before choice, the soul's quiet agreement with life. The plants here were unlike those elsewhere in the world, not in form but in presence. Each carried a specific frequency, a song. Some sang of joy, others of clarity, others of silence itself. The healers of Atlantis would visit the garden when their own energy became unclear, not to fix themselves but to realign. By sitting beside a certain tree, or placing a hand in a flowing stream, they would feel their system return to its original rhythm. The garden did not teach through instruction. It reminded through resonance, and children were often brought there in early years, not to learn but to remember how it feels to be whole. There was a place in the garden where two trees grew side by side, their roots entangled, Their branches arched toward one another like cupped hands. Between them was a circle of soft grass, and in its center a still pond no wider than a breath. To sit beside that pond was to see more than a reflection. Some saw past lives, some saw future selves, some saw nothing but light, warm and endless without form. It was said that the Garden of Balance was not planted, but called forth, that the land itself grew it, in response to the resonance of the people, as a gift, as a mirror, as a way back, should they ever begin to forget. And when the forgetting came, when Atlantis began to drift from its original song, the garden was the last to fall silent. Its plants withered not from drought or darkness, but from dissonance. It is said that on the final day, the pond turned opaque, the spirals in the stream straightened, and the two trees dropped their leaves in unison, as if the land itself had closed its eyes. But in dreams, in certain places where the earth still hums quietly, the garden can still be felt, in wild forests untouched by machines, in hidden groves where silence lives, in your own breath. When it slows and softens, you carry the Garden of Balance within you, and tonight, as the world grows quiet, you may feel its gate opening. No words needed, no effort, just stillness, and the soft return of your own original rhythm. The garden is not lost. It simply waits for balance to return through you beneath the sacred temples, deeper than even the halls of the great library. There existed a chamber few knew by name, a place of power, mystery, and immense stillness. They called it the Ark of Fire, not because it burned, but because it held the flame. This was not flame as we know it, not the devouring, hungry fire of destruction, but the original flame, the eternal essence, the pure creative current from which all form emerges. The Ark was not an object, nor a box, nor a relic, though it has been mistaken as all these things throughout history. It was a chamber, a field, a construct of such precision and purity that it could house the undiluted fire of Source. Only a handful of Atlanteans ever entered it, not out of elitism, but necessity, because to stand within the Ark required absolute inner coherence. One's heart, mind, body, and spirit had to be aligned, fully, silently, and without effort. It was not guarded by soldiers or locks. It was protected by resonance. The dissonance simply could not find it, even if they stood at its door. Within the Ark, light danced in patterns never seen elsewhere, like liquid geometry folding and unfolding through itself. The walls shimmered, but not with light from any source. They pulsed with presence, and in the center hovered the flame. It was not made of matter. It did not flicker or burn. It was awareness, pure, intelligent, creative awareness. To look upon it was to remember your origin. To feel it was to stand at the edge of what words cannot hold. The flame did not give answers. It removed questions. Some who entered the Ark emerged forever altered, not in body, but in perception. Their eyes saw truth before form. Their voices carried tones that calmed storms. Their presence alone was enough to shift the energy of an entire room. These were not chosen ones. They were rememberers. Atlantean culture revolved around balance, but at its heart was the sacred fire, the primal force of intention and creation. The Ark was consulted not for prophecy, but for clarity. When great decisions had to be made, the council would fast in silence, enter deep attunement, and one would be chosen, not to speak to the flame, but to listen in its presence. No words were exchanged, but understanding flowed like music through the bones. And in this way, Atlantis did not follow rulers or laws. It followed resonance. The flame never judged. It simply revealed. But as time passed, and inner clarity dimmed, fewer could access the chamber. Eventually, the path to the Ark became lost, not buried by stone, but veiled by dissonance. When Atlantis neared its end, some say the last of the rememberers entered the Ark one final time, not to ask for salvation, but to encode the flame into a frequency that could survive the fall. And when the waters rose, and the towers sank, and the city slipped into myth, the flame did not extinguish. It folded itself inward, hidden not in stone, not in earth, but in the only place it could remain safe, the human spirit. You may feel it now, in the quiet between your thoughts, that flicker, that warmth that needs no fuel, a soft glow behind your eyes when your heart is still. That is the arc of fire remembering itself through you, and in your deepest dreams, when you pass through golden doors without knowing how, and find yourself in a space that hums with light and silence. Know this, you have entered the chamber, and the flame still burns, not to destroy, but to create again.
If you walked through the streets of Atlantis in its prime, you would not have heard noise, but harmony. There was no chaos in the city, no rushing crowds or shouting merchants, no clamor of engines or flashing lights. Instead, there was a rhythm, soft and steady, woven into every part of daily life. Atlantean society was not built on survival, it was built on coherence. People did not wake up to alarms, but to the natural rhythms of their own energy. There were no clocks, yet time flowed with precision, measured by light, by vibration, by the body's intuitive alignment with the cosmos. Everyone had a role. No one had a title. There was no hierarchy, because power was not something to be held. It was something to be shared. Each person discovered their path, not through external instruction, but through internal resonance. From early childhood, individuals were guided into stillness, invited to explore the unique frequency they carried. And as this frequency clarified, their place in the whole revealed itself naturally. Artists did not choose art. The art chose them. Healers did not study to become. They remembered. Builders shaped stone, not with blueprints, but with vision, receiving structures from dream and vibration, then manifesting them in form. There were no tests, no ranks, no competition, for each being was seen as carrying a unique note in the symphony of the city. And the goal of life was simple, to stay in tune. Education was not accumulation, it was unfolding. Children learned through immersion, experience, and presence. They were exposed to beauty, to silence, to energy, and from there, knowledge would emerge as a natural blooming, rather than something imposed. Elders were not separated by age, but by frequency. Those whose presence carried depth, stillness, and lightness all at once were sought not as authorities, but as stabilizers. They didn't tell others what to do, they simply were, and that beingness was enough to guide the rest. Relationships were based on resonance, connection was felt, not negotiated. Love was not bound by possession, but by alignment. There was no concept of ownership in the way we know it. Land, water, energy, these were all shared, circulated, honored. A home belonged not to a person, but to a frequency, and when someone no longer aligned with that space, they moved without resistance, because movement was natural. Even governance was not governance, it was attunement. The council did not vote, it listened to the land, to the sky, to the subtle changes in the energy of the people. And when a decision had to be made, the right action would emerge, not by debate, but by clarity. Conflict was rare, but not absent. When imbalance occurred, it was met not with punishment, but with reflection. The individual would be supported in returning to alignment, rather than pushed into conformity. There were spaces throughout the city for stillness, chambers where anyone could go to reconnect, rebalance, remember. These were not places of retreat, but of return. Spirituality was not religion, it was relationship, not worship of a distant god, but communion with the divine in all things.
Work was not labor, it was expression. Play was not escape, it was creation. Even death was not feared, it was seen as transition, shift of frequency, a return to the field. And yet, even within such harmony, the seeds of forgetting began to grow. Slowly, subtly, outer form began to distract from inner clarity. Pride crept in, comparison emerged. Some began to believe their role meant more than another's, that their frequency was higher, their light purer. And so the chords that once danced together in perfect harmony began to drift apart. But before the fall, before the dissonance deepened, Atlantean society was a living song, not perfect, but present, not flawless but true. You may feel echoes of it in your quiet moments, in the way your heart longs for something more than systems and structures, in the part of you that knows there is another way to live, simpler, deeper, freer, that is not imagination, that is memory. You were there, perhaps not in form, but in field, and as you rest tonight, listening beyond thought, you may find yourself walking again through those golden streets, not as a visitor, but as someone who belongs, because Atlantis was not just a place, it was a state of being, and that state is waking in you again. Even the purest light, when left unguarded, can begin to bend. Even the most harmonious song, if not renewed, can slip out of tune. In the early ages of Atlantis, the crystals were alive with clarity, luminous structures that pulsed with intention, healing and connection. They responded only to coherence, to purpose aligned with the greater good. But over time, something shifted. It was not sudden. There was no single moment of betrayal. Rather, it was a slow forgetting, a quiet drifting from the center, so subtle that most didn't notice until the resonance had already changed. Some began to crave more influence, more control, not over others at first, but over the elements themselves. They sought to bend energy, to accelerate manifestation, to access deeper currents of power without first deepening their own stillness. At first the crystals resisted. They dimmed in response to ego. They refused to activate when approached with impure intention. But these individuals, once initiates, now seekers of control, grew clever. They developed ways to simulate coherence, to appear aligned on the surface while carrying dissonance within. They learned to mimic the correct tones, to reproduce the right patterns, and slowly, the crystals began to respond, not fully, not willingly, but enough. Enough for power to flow where it should not. Enough for imbalance to take root. This was not corruption in the human sense. It was distortion, a misalignment so subtle, it echoed invisibly through the energy grid. And once the grid was affected, everything began to shift. Weather patterns grew erratic, crops responded differently. The once perfect clarity of communication between beings became murky. Confusion took the place of certainty. Emotion became harder to ground. Silence, once sacred, began to feel heavy. And all the while, the crystals pulsed, still beautiful, still powerful, but no longer in perfect tune. They began amplifying what was fed into them, regardless of its origin. Anger, when present, grew louder. Fear, when activated, spread faster. Greed, once contained by harmony, found pathways through the field. The wise ones warned of this. They pleaded for a return to inner balance, to the initiations, to the listening. But by then, the outer brilliance of Atlantis had grown intoxicating. Towers gleamed brighter than ever. Technology reached new heights, and many mistook this progress as evidence of continued alignment. They did not see that the foundation had begun to crack. Some among the council tried to recalibrate the grid, deep beneath the surface, in the crystal chambers, but the distortion ran too deep, too quiet, too entangled with the minds of those who once upheld it. One by one, key structures began to misfire. Healing chambers no longer soothed. Transport systems malfunctioned. Memory crystals fragmented their knowledge. The city still shone on the surface, but underneath, the song had changed. And in the core, the great crystal, the heart of Atlantis's energy system, began to vibrate in unfamiliar tones, not corrupted, but confused, mirroring the chaos it was never meant to hold. And so what was once a civilization of harmony became a mirror of the very imbalance it had vowed to transcend. But the most tragic part, it happened so slowly that most still believed they lived in the golden age. The dissonance was everywhere, and yet invisible, until it wasn't. And by the time the resonance broke fully, it was too late. Yet even now, fragments of those crystals remain, buried beneath sea and time, still humming softly in the deep. And in moments of stillness, you may feel them, a subtle thrum in your chest when truth is near, a shimmer in your thoughts when alignment returns. That is not your imagination, that is remembrance, and the chance to tune once more before the silence returns.
Atlantis was not lost in a moment. It was lost in a mood, a gradual shift in the collective heart. For ages, the people lived in rhythm with the earth, with the stars, with each other. Their lives were symphonies of balance. Each choice made not just for the self, but for the harmony of the whole. But then something small crept in. It did not wear the face of evil. It wore the mask of desire. It began in subtle ways, a longing for more light, more sensation, more influence, not to harm, but to have. A healer wished to amplify her reach. A builder sought to shape mountains faster. A counselor dreamed of cities across the sea, built in his image. And so they reached, not out of malice, but out of hunger. The kind of hunger that forgets to ask why. At first their intentions still wore the clothing of service. Their words still echoed with the tone of the whole. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Greed in Atlantis did not roar. It whispered. It offered visions of expansion, dreams of mastery, the thrill of acceleration. And the people, once so inwardly attuned, began to look outward for fulfillment. Technology became spectacle. Crystals became tools of indulgence. The temples of stillness echoed with the footsteps of ambition. The very harmony that once made their civilization so powerful became the thing they tried to replicate. Without the patience, without the purity, they mimicked the forms, they copied the patterns, but the resonance was no longer there. And still, they pressed forward. More towers, more systems, more control. The land, so sensitive to frequency, began to react. The weather shifted, unpredictable, imbalanced. The seas grew restless. The animals retreated. But many did not see these as signs of warning. They saw them as obstacles to overcome. They built machines to force the land into stillness. They designed barriers against the waves. They spoke of evolution, even as they drifted from their own essence. Greed was not a tidal wave. It was a tide, pulling slowly, gently, persistently, until the shore had vanished. And no one remembered what it looked like before. Some remembered, the elders, the dreamers, the silent ones who still walked barefoot in the gardens. They whispered warnings, sang the old tones, sat in the stillness that now frightened so many. But their voices were called outdated, their ways too slow, too soft. And so Atlantis pushed forward, into brilliance, into dominance, into fracture. The energy grid that once pulsed with coherence began to splinter. The people, once so deeply connected, began to isolate, defending their thoughts, their territories, their truths. And yet, to the eye,
Atlantis still shone, its towers glittered in the sun, its waters gleamed in impossible hues, its technology surpassed anything known in this world, even now, but it was a hollow glow, a light divorced from its source. The soul of the city had gone quiet, and in that silence, the imbalance deepened, until one day, the harmony that once held an entire civilization aloft could no longer hold, and the land began to tremble, not out of rage, but out of return, because what is taken out of balance must eventually seek balance again, and Atlantis, in all its brilliance, had forgotten the one truth it was built upon, that no light can endure when the heart is closed, no knowledge can save what the soul has abandoned, but the memory remains in you, in the quiet ache for something simpler, something sacred, in the part of you that remembers what it felt like to live in alignment, to move without striving, to have without taking, to shine without burning. Greed did not destroy Atlantis, it displaced it, shifted it just enough out of harmony, until the song could no longer be sung. But you, in your breath, in your stillness, carry the original melody, and as you fall into sleep tonight, let it rise, not loudly, but gently, as it once did, before the fall, long before Atlantis vanished beneath the waves, before its towers collapsed, and its silence returned to the sea. There was a conflict that cracked the mirror of its perfection, a war that revealed the fractures already spreading through its heart. It began not with blood, but with pride, not with violence, but with vision. The Atlanteans, once content in their radiant harmony, began to look outward, toward the other lands that lined the distant shores. Among these, there was one that stirred both curiosity and challenge, a rising force known as Ancient Athens. At the time, Athens was still young, its buildings humble, its people grounded, its philosophies still in their infancy, but what it lacked in splendor, it carried in spirit. The Athenians, though less advanced in technology, held something that many Atlanteans had begun to lose: clarity of purpose. They were fierce in their independence, committed to balance, loyal to virtue. They had not yet tasted the indulgence of unchecked power, and so they walked with the quiet strength of those still connected to something deeper. The Atlantean leadership, seeing this spark, grew restless. Some felt threatened, others intrigued, and a few, those most affected by the growing hunger for control, saw an opportunity to expand their dominion, to bring order to those who had not yet ascended to their level of sophistication. But what they called order was no longer rooted in balance, it was rooted in pride, and so diplomatic channels became contests of will, conversations laced with superiority, intentions dressed in the language of unity, but vibrating with dominance. Athens resisted, not through aggression, but with presence. They saw what Atlantis had become beneath the golden light, a civilization that had begun to forget its own foundation, and so the tension grew. Lines were drawn, not on maps but in energy. What had once been mutual recognition became silent rivalry, and eventually Atlantis acted, not with overwhelming force at first, but with influence, with subtle manipulation of energy fields near Athenian borders, with pressure, with psychological tactics, with small shifts in frequency meant to unbalance the enemy before a single blade was drawn. But the Athenians were not easily shaken. They stood grounded, not in technology, but in knowing, in community, in virtue, in a sense of shared identity that no external power could dissolve. When Atlantis finally sent its forces, crafts humming with crystalline propulsion, warriors trained in vibrational combat, devices capable of altering weather and thought, they expected swift victory, but something unexpected happened. Athens did not collapse, its people did not scatter, instead they came together, more tightly, more purely than ever before. Their connection to each other deepened, their focus sharpened, their resolve amplified by the very threat meant to dissolve them, and in that clarity, they gained access to something Atlantis had begun to lose. Inner power. The battle was not decided by strength, but by resonance. Where Atlantis brought technology, Athens brought alignment, and the field, sensitive as ever, responded. Weapons misfired, ships lost navigation, the carefully calculated attacks dissolved into chaos, not because Athens struck them down, but because the truth of imbalance could no longer hold in the presence of unwavering coherence. Atlantis was defeated, not militarily, but energetically. It returned home, not in ashes, but in shame. But even then, many refused to see the message. They blamed tactics, spies, chance, anything but the one truth. Their hearts quietly held. They had fallen out of harmony, and the earth itself no longer supported their direction. Some within Atlantis took this defeat as a sacred warning, an invitation to remember. Others, wounded by pride, doubled down, diving deeper into control, into technological escalation, into separation from the very energies they once served. The war with Athens was not a war between nations, it was a reflection of Atlantis's war with itself, a mirror held up at the final moment, revealing what had been lost beneath all the light. And though few speak of it now, that war echoes still. In every moment we choose dominance over dialogue, progress over presence, pride over purpose. But just as Atlantis forgot, we can also remember that true power does not come from force, but from alignment, and that victory without resonance is no victory at all. So tonight, as you drift, feel into that ancient memory, the pulse of a world once brilliant, brought low not by enemy hands, but by its own forgetting, and let that remembering soften you, ground you, guide you back to what is real, because harmony, once lost, can always return, but only when we choose to hear its quiet song again. There was no explosion, no thunderous moment of catastrophe, no single scream that split the skies. When the collapse came, it was quiet, patient, precise, like a breath held too long, finally released. The energy grid of Atlantis was not a network of wires or machines. It was a living field, a lattice of frequency that connected every person, every building, every breath. It was the invisible nervous system of the city, woven into stone, soil, air, and thought. And when it pulsed in harmony, everything moved with grace. This grid had been created long ago by the first builders, those who still walked in perfect coherence with the earth and stars. It was tuned to the planet's natural harmonics, rooted in sacred geometry, and powered by crystalline consciousness. It carried not just electricity, but emotion, memory, awareness. It responded to intent. It amplified what lived in the hearts of the people. And for a time, it was beautiful beyond words. It was said you could stand in any square, touch your palm to the stone beneath your feet, and feel the entire city humming with peace. But as the people changed, so too did the current. What began as slight distortions, barely noticeable fluctuations in energy flow, grew into cracks in the resonance. The grid, designed to respond to truth, now pulsed with confusion, overwhelmed by competing intentions, distorted frequencies, and emotional dissonance. Healing centers began to malfunction. Transport systems stuttered and stalled. The crystalline cores deep beneath the city flickered with irregular pulses, shimmering, then dimming, like stars on the edge of extinction. And the people, still enamored with their surface brilliance, could not see the signals. The land felt it first. The plants, once luminous, responsive, lost their shimmer. The water, once structured, vibrating with light, grew heavy and dull. The grid's collapse was not sudden. It was systematic. One field at a time began to fall out of coherence, and with each one, a layer of the Atlantean soul dissolved. Those still aligned with the deeper ways, healers, elders, dreamers, tried to stabilize the grid. They meditated together in vast crystal chambers, attuned themselves to the old frequencies, sent waves of harmony into the lattice, and for a while it worked. Small sections of the city brightened, pockets of balance returned, but the effort was too great, and the dissonance too widespread. In some areas, the grid began to reverse itself, amplifying not harmony but fear, not healing but control. This is when the chaos began. People grew ill in ways the healers could not explain. Technology, once elegant and silent, became volatile. Some structures began to collapse from the inside, their energy matrices no longer able to hold form. The council, fragmented and uncertain, argued over causes and solutions, some calling for disconnection from the old systems, others demanding total control. But no decision could be made, because the field itself was no longer listening. The grid was not broken. It had withdrawn. It could no longer sustain a people out of resonance with themselves. And so it did what all living systems do when coherence is lost. It unraveled, one layer at a time, first the outer rings, then the inner temples, and finally the heart of the city. The great crystal, once radiant with unified intention, began to dim. Its hum softened, its light flickered, until in one final pulse, it went still. That moment passed like a whisper, unseen by many, but felt by all. Something essential had ended. Even if the towers still stood, the energy that once held a civilization together had let go, and in that letting go, the countdown began, not to punishment, but to return, to dissolution, so that something new might one day rise. And even now, beneath the sea, the grid sleeps, waiting, not for power, but for presence, because the collapse did not come from without. It came from within, and the rebirth, when it comes, will begin in the same place, inside the hearts of those who remember, who breathe with the earth, who walk in quiet rhythm with the stars. So tonight, as you rest, feel the current within you, the subtle spark that hums when your thoughts grow still. That is the grid, not lost, just waiting to rise again through you. It did not arrive with warning, nor with wrath. The great flood began in silence, a silence that fell over the land like twilight, a stillness that spoke louder than any voice. It came slowly, invisibly at first, not as a punishment, but as a rebalancing, a final breath, before the return. The Atlanteans had long sensed the change, though few admitted it aloud. The winds had shifted, the animals had grown restless, the once predictable tides had begun to move with a new and unfamiliar rhythm. And beneath the ground, the crystal veins, those living conduits of planetary energy, had begun to hum with a deeper frequency, as if preparing for release. The elders, those who still walked in silence and listened with the whole of their being, knew what was coming, not in detail, but in vibration, in dreams that felt more like memories, in songs that trembled with grief. They had seen the waters, rising, gently at first, seeping into the outer plains, filling the low gardens, softening the soil beneath once mighty towers. But others dismissed these signs. The council, divided and desperate, argued endlessly, some believing the grid would recover, others convinced that a technological solution would stabilize the land, and still others retreating into denial, clinging to the illusion of eternal brilliance. And so the days passed, and the waters rose. It was not a wave, it was a breathing in, The sea, reclaiming what had once been given. Oceans that had for millennia held Atlantis like a lover, now rose with the force of remembrance. Rain began to fall, not in torrents, but in a steady, ceaseless rhythm, and the skies grew dim, not with storm, but with sorrow. Then came the trembling. The land, once so stable, began to shift. Stone foundations cracked in slow motion. Great crystal towers leaned as if bowing to the earth. Streets once alive with resonance began to fracture along invisible lines, and all the while, the sea kept breathing, one breath, then another, rising higher, deeper, closer. Some fled to higher ground, though few knew where safety could truly be found. Others gathered in temples, not to pray for salvation, but to return to silence, accepting the truth that Atlantis was not being destroyed. It was being transformed, because those who remembered knew this was not the end. This was a return to water, to memory, to source. The flood was not punishment, it was purification, a cleansing of dissonance, a dissolving of what no longer served, a release of all that had fallen out of harmony with the greater song. And still, even as the waters swallowed streets, towers, temples, the people did not scream. There was fear, yes, grief, but beneath it all, a strange and sacred calm, because some part of them knew Atlantis had never been just a place. It was a state of being, and that state could never drown. The great flood was not an erasure. It was a pause, a breath between lifetimes, a resetting of the field. And in those final moments, as the last light vanished beneath the waves, as the ocean closed like a curtain over the greatest story ever lived, there were still those who sang, their voices soft, steady, rising through water, like light through glass. Songs not of mourning, but of memory, not of ending, but of seed, because they knew that Atlantis was not dying, it was becoming. And that one day, when the earth was ready, when the people were still, when the song was once again whole, the waters would part, the crystals would awaken, and Atlantis would rise again, not in stone, but in spirit, not from beneath the ocean, but from within the heart. So tonight, as you drift, listen, not for the sound of waves, but for the silence beneath them. That is where Atlantis waits, not lost, only sleeping. Before the final breath of Atlantis was drawn beneath the sea, before the grid collapsed and the towers surrendered to silence, the earth did not fall without speaking first. There were warnings, 3 of them, subtle to some, undeniable to others, not sent as punishment, but as invitations, 3 chances to return to balance before the tide became inevitable. The first warning came through the land. The energy grid, once fluid, humming with coherence, began to pulse irregularly. Crystalline nodes dimmed in key regions. Plants that once responded to thought no longer bloomed. Fields failed, not because the soil was poor, but because the vibration had shifted. Animals began to migrate in strange patterns, moving inland without cause. Birds flew in wide, uncertain spirals. Insects vanished from gardens tuned for them. And the trees, ancient and wise, dropped their leaves far too early. The elders knew. They walked barefoot into the groves, placed their hands upon the ground, and wept, not in fear but in recognition. The earth was speaking, gently at first, whispering, "Come back." The second warning came through dreams. The collective mind of Atlantis was still powerful, still vast, even in its dissonance. But the dreams began to change. They grew urgent, fragmented. People dreamt of water, not calmly lapping but surging, rising over walls, swallowing familiar places. Others saw the sky split open, not with fire but with silence. Children woke from sleep crying for islands that no longer existed. Artists painted visions of submerged temples and luminous whales carrying memory on their backs. The symbols were clear to those who could read them, but the council dismissed them as emotional noise, mass suggestion, spiritual nonsense. And so the dreams persisted, until the seers, those who still held the ancient codes, stood together and spoke with one voice. This is your second call. The soul of Atlantis is crying out. If we do not return inward, the earth will return us by force. They were not listened to. And so the third warning came through light. The skies, once stable, crystalline in their patterns, began to shimmer in unusual ways. Auroras danced where they never had before. The sun changed color at dusk. The stars pulsed with new rhythms. The alignments grew strange. Conjunctions appeared that hadn't been seen in thousands of years. The heavens were shifting, not as omen but as mirror, and with them came sound. Low frequencies heard only in silence. Not loud, not frightening, but ancient. Deep pulses that seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. It was not music, it was memory. Some gathered in the high temples to listen, others hid. The initiates knew, this is the final sign. And even then, Atlantis still had a choice. There was time to return, to recalibrate the grid, to dissolve the structures built on pride, to step back from the edge. But the desire to preserve the illusion of perfection was too strong. The outer brilliance, the golden image, the shining reputation, too addictive. The warnings had come. The earth had spoken patiently, lovingly, again and again. And now, the silence had arrived. Not as punishment, but as promise, a reset, a return. And though the city would fall, the message would rise. For the three warnings were not for Atlantis alone. They were for all time, and they echo still, in the trembling of our own earth, in the strange shapes that form in our dreams, in the shifting rhythms of the sky. The earth always speaks, gently at first, firmly when necessary, but always in love. Tonight as you rest, listen more deeply than ever, not to fear, but to invitation. The voice of the earth is not angry. It is waiting for you to remember how to hear. In the last days of Atlantis, when the waters had begun to rise, and the crystal hum had fallen to a broken rhythm, the leaders of the city gathered one final time, not in grandeur, not in ceremony, but in the quiet stillness of knowing. This was not a meeting of power. It was a gathering of presence. The elders, the remaining council members, the last of the dreamers and builders, all sat together in a chamber now dimmed, once lit by light that had no source but spirit. The city outside was already beginning to change. Streets once vibrant were silent. The plants had gone still. The animals had moved inland. And the people, those who had once walked in graceful harmony, moved through the city as if walking through a memory. The council chamber was circular, as all sacred spaces were. In its center stood a sphere of crystal, once used to amplify thought and unify decisions. But now, it pulsed faintly, its glow irregular, like the final heartbeat of something ancient and beloved. No one spoke for a long time. There was no debate, no speeches, because they all knew what they had built was falling, not because of invasion, not because of external threat, but because the song they once carried in their hearts had grown quiet. And yet, even in the face of dissolution, their purpose was not to mourn, but to decide, not whether to save Atlantis. It was beyond saving in the form they had known it, but whether to preserve its essence, its soul, its seed. Could the wisdom be carried forward? Could the flame be hidden deep enough to survive the coming waters? Could the light be encoded in memory, in DNA, in dream, so that one day far from now, it could rise again, not in form but in frequency? This was the task of the final council, Each elder came forward in turn, placing a hand upon the crystal at the center, not to speak words, but to transmit feeling, memory, prayer. Some wept, others stood in silence, eyes closed, remembering the beauty that once was, the balance, the song, the pure joy of living in resonance with the earth and stars. A few, those who still held clarity, began the encoding process. They sang into the crystal, not with voices but with soul tones, soundless frequencies that held entire libraries of understanding. They placed fragments of the Atlantean way into sound, light, water, and breath. They seeded it into the collective unconscious, into the dream realms, into the unborn future. Not all agreed. Some could not accept the fall, others blamed each other, or the people, or time itself. But those voices were few, and they were met with compassion, because this was not a time for division, it was a time for release. The final act was a silence. Each member of the council sat together in stillness, breathing as one, allowing the resonance of their unity to imprint itself into the earth below. It was said that in that moment, the very ground beneath the city glowed, not from light, but from memory, and that the sea, watching from the edges, paused, as if honoring the farewell. When the gathering ended, they left the chamber in peace. Some went to guide those still willing to listen. Others walked into the hills, to sleep beneath the stars one final time, and a few remained below, merging their breath with the last pulse of the grid, returning themselves to the field. The final council did not save Atlantis. They preserved it, in the only way it could be preserved, through essence, through vibration, through the quiet, knowing that what is true can never be lost, only transformed. And so, beneath the sea, within the collective soul of humanity, the echo of that final gathering still lives, in dreams of ancient cities, in the longing for something just out of reach, in the moments when silence feels sacred, not empty. Tonight, if you close your eyes and breathe deeply, you may find yourself seated in that circle, not as a visitor, but as one who was there, because Atlantis did not end. It changed form, and the council still gathers, in hearts that remember, in voices that speak truth, in souls that choose balance over control. The circle is not broken, it only waits for you to sit within it again. It happened slowly, and all at once. One morning the sky did not brighten as it should have. The light came dimmer, more diffused, like sunlight filtered through water before the water had even arrived. The people felt it in their bones first, a subtle weight in the chest, a quiet knowing in the breath. Something was about to change, not in the future, but now. The great energy grid had already collapsed. The final council had spoken. The dreams had grown quieter, and even the crystals had stopped responding. The land was no longer humming, it was exhaling. Then the sea began to rise, not in a crashing wave of chaos, but in a slow, majestic swell, as if the ocean itself had come not to destroy, but to embrace what it once helped bring forth. The outer rings of the city were the first to disappear. The great aqueducts, once spiraling with flowing light, dimmed as salt water filled their channels. The golden walkways that shimmered beneath the sun were swallowed in silence. People did not scream. There was no panic, only stillness. Some stood on rooftops and sang. Others lay down in gardens, hands pressed to the soil that had held them for lifetimes. A few gathered in circles, speaking no words, just breathing together, for the last time above the surface. There were those who tried to escape, those who fled toward the mountains, or called for skycrafts long dormant. But most simply listened, because by then they knew Atlantis was not ending. It was returning. The earth, ever patient, ever listening, was reclaiming the gift it had once allowed to rise. And the sea, timeless and wise, moved not with rage, but with mercy. As the waters crept inward, the great central towers, the spirals of glass and crystal that once reached for the stars, began to bend, not break. Some say they folded like petals, closing gently around the city's heart. Others say they disappeared entirely, not crumbling, but shifting to another realm. The central plaza, once the energetic heart of the city, was the last to go. It had always pulsed with light, with breath, with the frequency of balance. And in those final moments, as the water touched its stones, a great pulse rippled outward, not of panic, but of peace. A final signal, a goodbye, a promise. They say that pulse still echoes through the oceans, even now, that it travels in currents, in tides, in the dreams of whales, that if you dive deep enough, still enough, you can feel it. The submergence was not a tragedy, it was a ceremony, the return of Atlantis to the realm from which it had once risen, a resetting of vibration, a sacrifice of form to protect the essence. And as the final rooftops vanished beneath the waves, as the last stones were kissed by the sea, the city did not disappear. It transformed into memory, into myth, into the waiting silence beneath the ocean floor. Tonight, when your breath slows and the outer world grows quiet, listen closely. Beneath the hum of sleep, there is another rhythm, the rhythm of a city that still lives. In water, in dream, in you. Not all were taken by the sea. As Atlantis slipped beneath the waves, its towers surrendering to the deep, its song folding into silence, some remained above the surface. They were not chosen, nor spared, nor saved. They were simply in tune, enough to move when the earth whispered. They felt the call before the final pulse, in dreams, in signs, in the subtle change of wind and water. They did not run, they returned to the mountains, to the inner lands, to sacred spaces that had waited quietly beyond the city's brilliance. These were the ones who still remembered the older codes, the way of the earth, the language of the stars, not as theory, but as breath. Healers, watchers, architects of frequency. Some were elders, some only children, but all carried something vital, the essence of what Atlantis truly was. They did not flee out of fear. They departed with purpose, because Atlantis, though sinking in form, was meant to continue in spirit, and so they carried it into new lands, across new continents, into cultures that would one day give rise to myths and memories that still echo today. They brought no treasure, no gold, no machines. They brought memory, encoded in symbols, songs, patterns, and presence. In Egypt, they whispered geometry into the desert stone. In the Andes, they traced light into the mountains. In the Himalayas, they sang the breath of silence into caves that still remember. They taught without claiming, built without name. Their fingerprints are faint, but unmistakable to those who feel. You've seen them, in the impossible alignments of ancient structures, in stories of beings with glowing skin and eyes like oceans, in languages with no known root, and symbols that seem to speak to the soul before the mind. These are the echoes of the survivors, not masters over others, but stewards of the frequency. They interwove their knowledge with the earth's own unfolding, never seeking dominion, only remembrance. Many lived quiet lives, anonymous but radiant. They were the dream seeders, the keepers of time, the watchers of the sky. They knew that the truth could not be forced back into the world. It had to emerge, like a bud slowly waking in spring. And so they waited, generation by generation, passing the flame not in words, but in frequency, in lullabies, in sacred symbols drawn in sand. in quiet glances that told a child, "You've been here before." Some forgot, even among them. Some gave in to the weight of the world, but the essence survived, because what is true never dies. And now, as the world begins to stir again, as more and more feel the pull towards something ancient, something just out of reach, the legacy of the survivors reawakens in you, in your longing for truth without doctrine, in your search for beauty that feels like home, in the tears that rise without reason. When you see ruins you've never visited, you are not remembering stories, you are remembering yourself. Because Atlantis never truly ended, it changed form, and some carried it forward, in their bodies, in their dreams, in the codes you carry in your own bones. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, feel into that quiet knowing. You've been here before. You've walked among the ruins with sand in your hair and stars in your chest. And now, you are waking, not as a survivor, but as one who remembers why you stayed. Atlantis did not vanish. It hid. Not in the way of secrecy born from shame or fear, but in the way a seed hides in the soil, waiting for the right season to rise again. Its temples sank, its towers dissolved into silence, but its essence scattered, intentionally across the earth, encoded into the very framework of human evolution. That the Atlanteans who survived did not seek to rebuild what had fallen. They knew that what had been lost could not be restored in form, but in frequency it could be remembered. So they began the great work, not of recreating Atlantis, but of planting its legacy. They carried fragments of the old knowledge, and they wove it into the weft of every culture that would rise in their wake. These were not monuments. These were whispers, patterns, myths, alignments, sacred rhythms that seemed to emerge in unrelated places, yet all spoke the same hidden language. You see it in the pyramids, not just in Egypt, but across continents. Their shapes, their mathematics, their impossible precision. These were not copies, they were reminders. You see it in mandalas, spirals, sun wheels carved into stone, in chants that activate the body, even when the words are lost. You hear it in lullabies, in stories of a world before time, of beings who fell from the stars, of a flood that washed away an age. Atlantean knowledge was encoded not just into structures, but into human consciousness itself, through bloodlines, through dreams, through DNA. A resonance that would sleep for generations, only to stir again when the world was ready to receive it. This is the hidden legacy, not a library of scrolls, but a living current moving through humanity, pulsing softly beneath the noise. It wakes in the artist who sees symbols before they learn them, in the child who builds with perfect symmetry, in the one who hears music in silence, or cries when they stand near ancient stones. The legacy is you. Every time you question the world's pace, every time you pause in search of something more real, more true, more home, you're hearing the call of that forgotten lineage. It isn't about the past, it's about remembering the future that was once lived and can be lived again. Not through technology, but through harmony. Not through return, but through integration. Because the Atlanteans learned too, through their fall, through their forgetting. And that too is part of the legacy. It's why the codes were hidden and not given freely. It's why they waited, so that when they rose again, they would rise through those ready to hold them with humility. And now, the world trembles again, on the edge of its own forgetting, or its great remembering. And you are one of the ones who hears it. Not as noise, but as music. Not as pressure, but as promise. The hidden legacy is not buried. It's blooming through your hands, your choices, your voice, your presence. Tonight, as you fall into sleep, feel it stirring. A resonance in your chest, A memory that has no shape, but feels more real than the day behind you. You are not just remembering Atlantis, you are carrying it forward. One breath at a time, one step back into harmony. The seed was never lost. It has always lived in you, long after the waters settled, long after Atlantis was whispered into myth and tucked into the folds of forgotten time. Something stirred, quietly, deeply, in the space where sleep and memory touch. The dreamers began to wake, not all at once, not with fanfare or prophecy, but like stars blinking back into view after a long and silent night. These dreamers weren't bound to one place or people. They were born into all walks of life, scattered across continents, cultures, and timelines, carrying within them a resonance so subtle, so ancient, that most of them couldn't name it. But they felt it in their earliest moments. They were the ones who looked to the stars and wept without knowing why, who felt homesick for a place they had never seen, who saw symbols in clouds, music in silence, stories in stones. They were the children who spoke of things before they learned to speak, the ones who painted spirals, built temples in sand, sang melodies that hadn't been taught to them. As they grew, many forgot. Life, as it exists now, makes little room for memory that doesn't fit within its structures. But the resonance stayed, quietly humming beneath the noise. And as the world began to speed up, the dreamers began to slow down, not outwardly, but inwardly. They began asking questions about time, about purpose, about truth. They began seeing through the veil, and then one by one, they began to remember, not through facts or history, but through feeling, through dreams so vivid they lingered for days, through sudden surges of grief, joy, awe, as if touching something just beneath the surface of the moment, through the undeniable pull toward the ancient, toward light encoded in stone, in sound, in sky. They began to find each other, drawn not by belief, but by resonance. Conversations with no beginning, just recognition, a knowing smile, a shared silence, the sense of, oh, there you are. And slowly, the memory of Atlantis rose again, not in ruins unearthed, but in frequency. The dreamers didn't try to rebuild what had fallen. They knew better now. They came not to repeat Atlantis, but to complete what it had begun. They brought new forms of healing, rooted in sound, breath, light. They reawakened the sacred geometry of movement, of space, of language. They channeled forgotten tones into music that bypassed the mind and touched the soul. And they began to live differently, not in rebellion, but in remembrance, not in escape, but in return. They returned to stillness, to presence, to the slow rhythm of the earth's breath, and in doing so, they began to restore the field. That same field that once held Atlantis in balance, the grid of harmony, long collapsed, began to flicker again, through hearts, through hands, through the quiet choices of those who remembered. The dreamers are not many, but they are enough, because one aligned soul, walking in truth, sings louder in the field than 1,000 dissonant ones, and their presence begins to tune the world. You may be one of them. You wouldn't need to be told. You felt it all your life. And now as you read these words, a part of you stirs, familiar, wordless, whole. It does not ask for proof. It only hums in response. Because the dream never ended. It went underground, into silence, into sleep. And now, through you, through us, through the return of the dreamers, Atlantis breathes again, not in stone, but in spirit. And this time, we will remember, not just who we were, but who we're here to become. They are not like those who came before. Their eyes hold the weight of stars, and the softness of skies not yet seen. They arrive quietly, but when they look at you, something ancient stirs in your chest. The children of the new dawn are not here to learn the old ways. They are here to remember beyond them. Born into a world still blinking through its own forgetting, they carry the codes of what is next, not as theory, but as presence. They don't come with blueprints or manifestos. They come with resonance. Some call them indigo, crystal, starseed, but they do not need names. They know who they are, at least in the places that matter. And though their memories may not rise in words, their actions carry the signature of a deeper truth. They do not fit into the systems we've created. They find noise where we've grown used to it. They question rules we forgot to question. They resist control, not because they are rebellious, but because their souls remember freedom as a natural state. They are born with empathy so deep it can overwhelm them. They feel what others cannot name. They cry for places they've never seen. They laugh in tones that shift the atmosphere of a room. Some struggle, not because they are broken, but because the world has not yet made space for their clarity. They move slower or faster. They learn through absorption, not repetition. They crave silence. They seek truth immediately, instinctively, without compromise. And they carry light, not as metaphor, but as structure. In their DNA are patterns seeded long ago, fragments of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of civilizations lost to the eye but alive in the field. They've returned to continue what was started, not by repeating it, but by transcending it. They are builders of new temples, temples made of trust, of community, of intention, not stone. They are healers who use their gaze as medicine. They are architects of unseen realities, navigating dimensions as easily as we navigate thought. And yet, they are still children, vulnerable, tender, open. They need guardians who remember how to listen, not to correct them, but to hold space for their unfolding. They need touch, earth, water, breath, not flashing screens or anxious systems. They need rhythm, not routine. They need truth, even when it's messy. They need you, not as authority, but as mirror. For they are here not to follow, but to awaken. They are dreamers, but not of the past. They are dreamers of what's coming, of what has always waited beneath the noise. Harmony, transparency, a life where soul leads, a world where energy is understood, where technology serves consciousness, not replaces it, where silence is sacred again. They already know the way, and your presence, your love, your remembrance helps them walk it with less weight. The children of the new dawn are not asking to be taught who they are. They are asking for the space to be it. And when they are ready, when we are still enough to feel it, they will remind us of what we almost lost. They will light the new grids with their laughter. They will walk barefoot into a future our ancestors only dreamed of. And the song of Atlantis, long submerged, will rise in a new form. Not the echo of an old civilization, but the birth cry of a new one. Tonight as you fall into sleep, listen for the sound of their light. It's already here, and it's just beginning. Long after the towers of Atlantis had fallen, long after the ocean had claimed the streets, the temples, the voices of an age now spoken of only in whispers, the crystals remained, not shattered, not destroyed, but deeply asleep, buried not only beneath the weight of the sea, but beneath the forgetting of humankind. These were no ordinary stones. They were living structures, shaped by sound and thought, encoded with knowledge not in language, but in resonance. Each crystal was a vessel of memory, of harmony, of power held in stillness. They had once pulsed with light, not from within themselves, but from their sacred connection to the consciousness of those who walked the city above them. When the Atlanteans fell from alignment, when the harmony that once coursed through their breath began to bend toward pride, the crystals did not judge. They simply dimmed, they withdrew, as if the earth herself tucked them away for safekeeping, as if they knew that what had been misused must sleep until it could be held with reverence again. And so they waited, beneath the ocean floor, in chambers carved with codes now lost to waking memory, in mountain caverns beneath lands where ancient feet once stood in prayer, in temples that time swallowed, yet which hum faintly at night, when no one is listening. They waited for the signal, not a sound, not a word, but a frequency, because the crystals were not designed to serve the mind. They were born to respond to the heart. They awaken not to command, but to coherence. And now, after ages of stillness, some have begun to stir, not all at once, not with drama, but with a soft glow, a subtle vibration in places where people meditate without knowing why. A shimmer of warmth beneath the soles of those who walk with reverence, a pulse in the palms of those who place their hands on certain stones, certain trees, certain ancient walls and feel something. The crystals remember, and they respond when we begin to remember too. Not Atlantis as a myth, but as a way of being. You may have already felt it, a hum beneath your skin, when you stand on sacred ground, a dream in which light speaks without sound, a sudden flood of knowing that arrives before thought. These are not accidents. They are echoes, and the echoes are growing stronger. Some say the crystals were seeded across the earth long before Atlantis fell, placed like notes in a great planetary symphony, waiting for the moment when humanity would once again learn to listen instead of demand. And now more and more are hearing the call, in meditation, in dreams, in the spaces between words, not to activate the crystals, but to activate ourselves. Because the reawakening of the crystals is not about power, it is about purity, not moral purity, but vibrational alignment, a return to stillness, a return to presence, a return to the language of the soul that speaks in silence and moves through breath. The crystals will not rise through force. They will not sing for the ones who seek them to gain control, but they will open to the ones who arrive with nothing but truth in their field. They remember who you are, and when you remember too, they begin to shine again, not from beneath the sea, but from within you, because you are made of the same geometry, the same light, the same song. And when you walk in resonance, you don't need to find the ancient crystals, you become them. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, as your breath slows, as your thoughts dissolve into the soft black of rest, listen beneath your heartbeat. Feel into the field around your body. There it is, a subtle sacred vibration, older than words, more intimate than memory. The crystal is waking, and through you so is the earth. They are not like those who came before. Their eyes hold the weight of stars and the softness of skies not yet seen. They arrive quietly, but when they look at you, something ancient stirs in your chest. The children of the new dawn are not here to learn the old ways, they are here to remember beyond them. Born into a world still blinking through its own forgetting, they carry the codes of what is next, not as theory, but as presence. They don't come with blueprints or manifestos. They come with resonance. Some call them indigo, crystal, starseed. But they do not need names. They know who they are, at least in the places that matter. And though their memories may not rise in words, their actions carry the signature of a deeper truth. They do not fit into the systems we've created. They find noise where we've grown used to it. They question rules we forgot to question. They resist control, not because they are rebellious, but because their souls remember freedom as a natural state. They are born with empathy so deep it can overwhelm them. They feel what others cannot name. They cry for places they've never seen. They laugh in tones that shift the atmosphere of a room. Some struggle, not because they are broken, but because the world has not yet made space for their clarity. They move slower or faster. They learn through absorption, not repetition. They crave silence. They seek truth immediately, instinctively, without compromise, and they carry light, not as metaphor, but as structure. In their DNA are patterns seeded long ago, fragments of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of civilizations lost to the eye, but alive in the field. They've returned to continue what was started, not by repeating it, but by transcending it. They are builders of new temples, temples made of trust, of community, of intention, not stone. They are healers who use their gaze as medicine. They are architects of unseen realities, navigating dimensions as easily as we navigate thought. And yet, they are still children, vulnerable, tender, open. They need guardians who remember how to listen, not to correct them, but to hold space for their unfolding. They need touch, earth, water, breath, not flashing screens or anxious systems. They need rhythm, not routine. They need truth, even when it's messy. They need you, not as authority, but as mirror. For they are here not to follow, but to awaken. They are dreamers, but not of the past. They are dreamers of what's coming, of what has always waited beneath the noise. Harmony, transparency, a life where soul leads, a world where energy is understood, where technology serves consciousness, not replaces it, where silence is sacred again. They already know the way, and your presence, your love, your remembrance helps them walk it with less weight. The children of the new dawn are not asking to be taught who they are. They are asking for the space to be it. And when they are ready, when we are still enough to feel it, they will remind us of what we almost lost. They will light the new grids with their laughter. They will walk barefoot into a future our ancestors only dreamed of. And the song of Atlantis, long submerged, will rise in a new form, not the echo of an old civilization, but the birth cry of a new one. Tonight, as you fall into sleep, listen for the sound of their light. It's already here, and it's just beginning. Long after the towers of Atlantis had fallen, long after the ocean had claimed the streets, the temples, the voices of an age now spoken of only in whispers, the crystals remained, not shattered, not destroyed, but deeply asleep, buried not only beneath the weight of the sea, but beneath the forgetting of humankind. These were no ordinary stones. They were living structures, shaped by sound and thought, encoded with knowledge, not in language, but in resonance. Each crystal was a vessel of memory, of harmony, of power held in stillness. They had once pulsed with light, not from within themselves, but from their sacred connection to the consciousness of those who walked the city above them. When the Atlanteans fell from alignment, when the harmony that once coursed through their breath began to bend toward pride, the crystals did not judge. They simply dimmed, they withdrew, as if the earth herself tucked them away for safekeeping, as if they knew that what had been misused must sleep until it could be held with reverence again. And so they waited. Beneath the ocean floor, in chambers carved with codes now lost to waking memory, in mountain caverns beneath lands where ancient feet once stood in prayer, in temples that time swallowed, yet which hum faintly at night when no one is listening, they waited for the signal, not a sound, not a word, but a frequency, because the crystals were not designed to serve the mind. They were born to respond to the heart. They awaken not to command, but to coherence. And now, after ages of stillness, some have begun to stir. Not all at once, not with drama, but with a soft glow, a subtle vibration in places where people meditate without knowing why, a shimmer of warmth beneath the soles of those who walk with reverence, a pulse in the palms of those who place their hands on certain stones, certain trees, certain ancient walls and feel something. The crystals remember, and they respond when we begin to remember too. Not Atlantis as a myth, but as a way of being. You may have already felt it, a hum beneath your skin when you stand on sacred ground, a dream in which light speaks without sound, a sudden flood of knowing that arrives before thought. These are not accidents, they are echoes, and the echoes are growing stronger. Some say the crystals were seeded across the earth long before Atlantis fell, placed like notes in a great planetary symphony, waiting for the moment when humanity would once again learn to listen instead of demand. And now, more and more are hearing the call, in meditation, in dreams, in the spaces between words, not to activate the crystals, but to activate ourselves. Because the reawakening of the crystals is not about power, it is about purity, not moral purity, but vibrational alignment, a return to stillness, a return to presence, a return to the language of the soul that speaks in silence and moves through breath. The crystals will not rise through force, they will not sing for the ones who seek them to gain control, but they will open to the ones who arrive with nothing but truth in their field. They remember who you are, and when you remember too, they begin to shine again, not from beneath the sea, but from within you, because you are made of the same geometry, the same light, the same song, and when you walk in resonance, you don't need to find the ancient crystals, you become them. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, as your breath slows, as your thoughts dissolve into the soft black of rest, listen beneath your heartbeat, feel into the field around your body. There it is, a subtle sacred vibration, older than words, more intimate than memory. The crystal is waking, and through you so is the earth. Even now, far beneath the crashing of waves, deeper than the trenches mapped by man, something is singing. It does not sing in words, or even in sound. It sings in resonance, a slow, endless hum carried not through water, but through memory. It is not a song you hear, it's a song you remember. This is the song of Atlantis, not the Atlantis of myth or ruin, but the Atlantis that still breathes in frequency, buried not in stone, but in vibration. When the city fell, when towers collapsed like tired giants, when the golden light dimmed beneath the weight of its own forgetting, the song remained. It did not vanish, it simply descended, down into the silence, down into the seabed, down into the soul of the world. It lives now, in the movements of the tides, in the soft call of whales, in the gentle swirl of current in untouched places. It lives in you, in the part of your spirit that slows when the world is too loud, in the dreams where water calls your name, in the stillness behind your thoughts, where something vast and wordless waits. The Atlanteans once lived in harmony with that song. They built in tune with it, breathed in rhythm with it, healed by it. Their cities were shaped not for beauty, but for resonance. Every curve, every chamber, every corridor, an echo of the song beneath the sea. But when dissonance crept in, subtle at first, then certain, the song grew quiet, not gone, just further away. And when the flood came, when the ocean claimed what could no longer hold light, the song remained behind, like a sacred promise sealed in salt. Some say that song still moves through the world, in sacred sites, in places of deep stillness, in people who were never taught to listen, but somehow know how. You may have felt it. in the breathless pause before a memory rises, in the sudden ache for something ancient and unnamed, in the way your heart responds to oceans, to blue, to the echo of a silence you've never quite heard. The song beneath the sea is not a relic, it is an invitation. It calls not to the ears, but to the soul. It asks not for understanding, but for surrender. It wants nothing from you but your presence. And when you finally become still enough, quiet enough, open enough, you'll feel it vibrating through your bones. A low, endless hum, a lullaby, older than time. You are not imagining it. You are not dreaming. You are remembering. Because you were there, you were part of that song. And now, the sea is singing it back to you, not to return you to the past, but to remind you of who you've always been. Tonight, as you fall into sleep, let the water hold you. Let the silence sing to you. Let yourself dissolve into the soft hum beneath the waves. The song is still there, still waiting, and it knows your name.
When Atlantis fell, it did not fall into ruin. It fell into silence. A silence so complete, so alive, that it became something more than absence. It became a vessel. Beneath the weight of the ocean, beyond the collapse of temples and the dimming of crystalline towers, something remained. Not in stone, not in memory alone, but in presence. And within that presence, they waited. The guardians of the deep were never rulers, never priests, never bound by names or forms. They existed even before Atlantis had a name. Beings of pure resonance, formless yet felt, invisible yet unmistakable to those who knew how to sense what eyes cannot see. They were the original keepers, not of knowledge, but of frequency, the tone of balance, the vibration of truth, the hum of a civilization that once moved in perfect rhythm with the cosmos. As the harmony of Atlantis began to waver, as ego crept in, and the golden grid that held the city together began to fracture, the guardians did not intervene. They did not fight to preserve what was destined to dissolve. Instead, they withdrew, quietly, intentionally, carrying with them the purest essence of what Atlantis was meant to be. They sealed it deep within the earth, beneath the sea, where time moves differently, and memory is not forgotten, but held in still, crystalline suspension. They have never spoken, for they do not need to. Their language is felt, not heard. It moves through dreams, through subtle pulses in the heart, through the soft aching you feel when standing before an ancient place, with no explanation for your tears. They do not show themselves to everyone, only to those whose inner stillness matches their timeless quiet. When the body slows, when the breath deepens, when thought surrenders to presence, that is when they arrive. You might have touched them already, in a dream where the water was warm and endless, in a meditation where light moved through you like memory, in the sudden knowing that you are not just human, but a carrier of something ancient and luminous. These are not fantasies, they are echoes, fragments of a time when you were aligned with the earth, with the stars, and with something far deeper than either. The guardians are not waiting to be found, they are waiting for humanity to remember how to listen, not with the mind, but with the field around the heart. They protect the original codes, not just of Atlantis, but of balance itself. And these codes cannot be unlocked through intellect, control, or desire, only through coherence, through stillness, through the return of integrity to the human soul. They are not gods, they are not saviors, they do not promise a future or grieve the past. They simply are constant present, holding the light steady beneath the waves until we are ready to receive it again. And when enough of us remember how to walk gently, how to speak only what is true, how to create not from fear but from resonance, then the gates will open.
The crystalline memory they have kept hidden will rise, not into the world but into the hearts of those who can carry it without distortion. Tonight, as the world softens and your thoughts slow into silence, you may feel them, not as a vision, not as a voice, but as a calm that settles in your chest without cause. A stillness that feels older than the body it lives in. That is them. That is the guardians, watching not from above but from within, reminding you that Atlantis was never lost, only waiting to be remembered. Atlantis was never truly buried in stone or sea. It was buried in something far more sacred, far more enduring. It was buried in the heart. Not the heart that beats, but the heart that knows. The quiet center of your being, the place where longing lives without language, where memory hums beneath the noise of everyday thought. After the fall, after the waters closed like a great exhale over golden spires and shimmering halls, something of Atlantis remained, not in form but in feeling, not in history, but in echoes. You've felt it before, in the way your chest tightens when you hear certain tones, in the tears that rise when you see places you've never been to, but somehow remember, in the way you crave silence, even when the world demands your voice. That is the echo, soft, unspoken, undeniable. It doesn't try to be heard, it waits to be felt. The Atlanteans knew the heart was more than a vessel. It was a mirror, a compass, a sacred chamber that could hold the entire sky. They built their world in alignment with it, and when that alignment was lost, the only place left for their truth to go was inward. So it went into the bloodlines, into the breath, into the soul stream of those who would one day remember. It lives in the child who hums to themselves without melody, but with meaning, in the healer who feels pain before a word is spoken, in the artist who paints the spiral before knowing what it means. The human heart is not just a chamber of love. It is a chamber of memory, a quiet archive of everything we once were, and everything we still are. And now, as the earth shifts again, as the old systems tremble, and the surface grows thin, the echoes are rising, not loudly, not quickly, but through dreams, through stillness, through synchronicities, so subtle, they might almost be missed. They come as warmth with no source, as truth that doesn't need to be proven, as the feeling that something ancient is waking inside of you. You are not broken, you are remembering. Not a place, but a vibration. Not a story, but a state of being. Because the Atlantean frequency was never about what we built. It was about how we felt, how we breathed, how we moved through the world in tune with the invisible rhythm behind all things. And that rhythm is returning now, through you. Every time you choose peace over pride, stillness over reaction, truth over control, the frequency strengthens. You don't need to rebuild Atlantis. You only need to become what Atlantis once stood for. A human heart in harmony. A soul that sings without sound. A presence that ripples balance wherever it goes. Tonight, as your breath slows, as the weight of the day dissolves, feel into that quiet center. The part of you that has never been touched by time. The echo is there. It has always been there. And now, you're finally ready to hear it again. Not through the mind, but through the heart. The temple never truly fell. It just moved inside of you. And in every moment of stillness, it rises again. It began slowly, so slowly that most didn't even notice it at first. Not as a shift in governments, not as a headline, not as a noise from above, but as a whisper from within, a subtle change in the rhythm of things, a soft hum behind ordinary moments, a knowing in the body that something old was returning. People started waking up differently, with dreams they couldn't explain, with memories that didn't belong to this life, with an ache for something they had never known, yet deeply missed. Some felt it in their hands, an urge to touch the earth more often. Others in their hearts, a longing to be softer, slower, more true. Many didn't have words for it, but they all felt it, a global realignment. Not coordinated, not led, but rising like a tide from beneath the surface of everything. The ancient frequencies, once buried, once sealed, had begun to leak through the cracks in the modern world, and with every crack, more light got in. Old truths began to resurface, not as facts, but as feelings. Ideas once dismissed, as myths started to feel like home. Atlantis, Lemuria, the stars, they were no longer stories. They were codes waking in the soul. People who had never met were dreaming the same landscapes, speaking the same symbols, crying the same quiet tears for places they had never seen with their eyes. And as more began to feel it, more began to remember, not who they were, but what they carried, not what was lost, but what still lived inside them. Temples of breath were built in living rooms, rituals of stillness emerged in cities that had forgotten silence. Hands reached for the soil, hearts opened without permission, and light returned to the body, not as vision, but as vibration. The earth responded. Her skies shifted, her winds softened, her waters carried a new clarity. Because the earth was never separate from the awakening, she was always part of the memory. The pulse beneath Atlantis, the breath beneath every forgotten temple, the first witness and the last. And now she too was waking, not with thunder, but with invitation. The grids that once fell were flickering back to life, not because someone rebuilt them, because the people were beginning to resonate again. Coherence spread not like wildfire, but like music, subtle, rhythmic, unstoppable. And in the quiet corners of the world, in places where crystals sleep and rivers hum with memory, you could feel it. The global awakening wasn't a revolution, it was a return to the center, to stillness, to the song we once sang with the stars. And you, yes, you are part of it. Every breath you take in awareness, every time you choose truth over fear, every moment you rest into presence, you are tuning the field, you are anchoring the light, you are remembering for all of us. The world isn't falling apart, it's falling back in tune. So tonight, as your thoughts soften and your breath finds its rhythm, know this is not an ending. It's the re-beginning of something vast, ancient, and beautifully familiar. You are not alone in this remembering. You are part of a global hum, a rising wave of resonance, and Atlantis is singing through you once more. They are not like the ones before them. Their eyes arrive already open, not wide with wonder, but deep with memory. You can feel it when they look at you, that weightless, unwavering presence that seems to see through you, as though they recognize something you've forgotten about yourself. And in truth they do. The new children are not here to learn the old world. They are here to outgrow it, not through resistance, but through remembering. Born in the midst of chaos, yet untouched by it, they do not carry the imprint of fear, not in the way we did. They vibrate differently, lighter, but sharper, like crystal tuned, to a frequency that hasn't yet become language. They come with an intelligence that doesn't follow structure. They learn by absorbing, remembering, activating, and though they may appear quiet, distracted, or out of place, they are more connected than we know. Some speak in symbols before they form sentences. Some draw maps to places no one has taught them about. Some place their hands on the earth and know her pain before they ever learn what pain means. They are not here to fix what was broken. They are here to build what comes after. Their minds are multidimensional. Their emotions move in waves that reflect the field around them. Their sensitivities are not weaknesses. They are finely tuned antennae for truth. And yes, many struggle, not because there is something wrong with them, but because this world is still learning how to hold their light. We try to teach them to fit in, to follow rules built for minds that forgot, but they do not come here to fit. They come to remind us what it's like to feel deeply without fear, to speak honestly without shame, to move slowly without apology, to love without condition. They carry Atlantis in their bones, not the structures, but the state of being, the frequency of inner harmony, the memory of what it's like to live in tune with everything. And when you're with them, if you're quiet enough, you can feel it, that subtle resonance, that gentle pulse that says, you've been here before, and you're not alone anymore. They do not need to be told who they are. They need to be seen, not through labels or diagnoses, but through presence. They need stillness, touch, nature, authenticity, because anything false makes them shrink, but anything real, anything true, makes them shine. We are not here to mold them. We are here to walk beside them as they reshape the world in the image of what we once knew. A world without hierarchy, without noise, without separation. A world where feeling is honored and silence is sacred, where imagination is not dismissed, but followed home. These new children are not coming. They are already here, and they are waking something in us we thought was lost forever. The child in you remembers, the part that once sang to stars and listened to trees, the part that felt without flinching, that trusted without proof, that knew without question. And every time you hold space for one of them to just be, you're not teaching them, you're remembering with them. Tonight, as the world softens around you, as your breath slows and the thoughts fade into darkness, feel that inner child in you, the one who never forgot, just fell asleep for a while. That child is waking now, with them, because the new children have not come to follow us, they have come to lead us back to ourselves. The old grid is gone. Not all at once, but piece by piece. It faded, cracked by dissonance, worn thin by centuries of forgetfulness. The energetic architecture that once held Atlantis, and later the mirrored systems that rose in its shadow, could no longer support the weight of unconsciousness. It wasn't a collapse, it was a release. A gentle undoing of what no longer served, and beneath that undoing, something began to weave itself quietly into place. A new grid, not built by machines or calculations, but by hearts. It started subtly, in sacred places long forgotten, where earth still breathed freely beneath stone and sky, in meditations that turned into transmissions, in dreams where golden strands of light stitched across the planet like a luminous web. This grid isn't built with lines or numbers. It is formed through resonance. Each human who returns to stillness, each act of love, truth, presence, each breath that slows into harmony, anchors another thread. It is not a structure we can see, but we feel it, in the way we're drawn to certain lands without knowing why, in the synchronicities that bloom between strangers, in the warmth we feel when someone speaks from their soul. The new grid responds to coherence, not just emotional clarity, but vibrational truth. It does not ask us to be perfect, only aligned. And unlike the old system's rigid, hierarchical, defined by control, this grid flows. It expands and contracts like breath. It listens, it learns, it remembers with us. It is made of connection, but not in the digital sense. It is the reweaving of the field through the human spirit, the return of unity, not as ideology, but as experience. Every time someone chooses compassion instead of reaction, every time someone grounds themselves in nature and listens without noise, every time truth is spoken gently, without force, the field responds. A new thread glows, the grid strengthens. This is not a structure of the future, it is a structure of the now, and it is growing through you. The more you align with your own inner resonance, the more your energy becomes part of the grid. Your presence becomes an anchor point, your heart a transmitter, and slowly, The earth begins to glow again, not from above, but from within. The new grid doesn't ask you to believe. It asks you to feel, to show up, to soften, to live as if every breath is sacred. Because in truth, it is. And when enough of us return to that truth, when enough hearts light up, not from effort, but from embodiment, the grid will no longer be invisible. It will be felt in every word, seen in every eye, heard in the silence between thoughts. And just like the Atlanteans once did, before the forgetting, before the fall, we will live in a world designed not by control, but by resonance. Tonight as you rest, allow yourself to feel into the web that surrounds you, not the one of wires and signals, but the one woven through breath, through love, through stillness. The new grid is here, and you are already part of it, just by being who you truly are. Atlantis never truly disappeared. It only changed form, folded itself into silence, into story, into soul. It became a memory scattered across dreams, a frequency buried not in the ocean, but in the human spirit. And now, slowly, steadily, it is returning, not as a city rising from the sea, not as towers or temples or glowing machines, but as you. You are its return. With every breath you take in presence, with every truth you speak in softness, with every act of stillness in a restless world, Atlantis comes back through your being. Because Atlantis was never about structure, it was about resonance, a way of being in harmony with all things, with earth, with stars, with each other, with self. And when that harmony was lost, Atlantis sank, not to die, but to rest, to sleep within the ones who would one day remember, the ones who would carry the codes, generation after generation, in blood, in breath, in longing. And now those codes are waking, not as history, but as frequency, not in stone, but in energy, not through force, but through remembering. You don't need to rebuild the city. You are the city. Your heart is the central crystal, your truth, the power grid, your silence, the sacred temple. And when enough of us return to that inner alignment, when enough hearts hum in coherence again, Atlantis won't just return, it will reveal itself, not in one place, but everywhere, in the way we gather, in the way we heal, in the way we speak without violence, and lead without control, a world where energy is felt and honored, where children are guided by truth, not fear, where time slows and presence deepens, where the soul is safe to be seen again. This is not a future to reach for, it's a state to remember, and that memory is already alive in you, in your dreams, in your quiet moments, in the aching beauty that sometimes rises from nowhere. So tonight, as you lie back into the arms of sleep, know that this is not the end of a story. It is the return of a song sung through your breath, a light carried in your eyes, a rhythm your soul never stopped dancing to. Atlantis has not been waiting to rise, it's been waiting for you to. And now, you are. Welcome back, dreamer. Welcome home.